Chapter 701. The rain suddenly stopped. Just when everyone in the world thought that the rain would never stop, the rain that had lasted for many days came to an abrupt end on an ordinary autumn day. At first, no one believed it at all. People walked out of the palaces, out of the fields, under the eaves, and into the small courtyards. They looked up at the sky in confusion until they realized that there was no more water dripping from the clouds. Only then did they realize what had happened. Cheers rang out in every corner of the fields and cities. However, the entire world had been soaked in this heavy rain for too long. People's clothes and moods seemed to have become moldy. After the surprise and excitement, exhaustion quickly came. The relief workers continued to provide relief, the dazed ones continued to daze, and those who slept turned around and went to bed. Everything seemed so numb. After the rain stopped, the clouds naturally dispersed. At night, people gathered around the dining table to discuss the rain. After finishing their chores, they returned to their respective rooms to sleep, entering the first dreamland after the rain. The night clouds that had covered the sky for many days gradually dispersed. A dog barked in the street. The black dog's barking seemed very frightened and very uneasy. A dog barked in the fields. The thin yellow dog's barking seemed very confused and afraid. More and more dogs barked. All the dogs in the world seemed to have received some kind of command. They all barked at the same time. The barking echoed in the cities and the countryside, waking countless people from their dreams. People rubbed their sleepy eyes and walked out of their rooms. Some people held anti-theft wooden sticks. Some people complained that their daughters-in-law had forgotten to feed the dogs today. They took the food bowls to find their dogs. Only then did they realize that it was not only their dogs that were barking, but all the dogs were barking. All the dogs were barking at the night sky. People curiously followed the eyes of the dogs and forgot about the night sky. The wooden sticks in their hands slipped, the food bowls in their hands slipped and fell on their feet. However, they did not seem to feel any pain. Everyone was shocked. Their attention was completely attracted by the object in the night sky. Even if the house behind them caught fire, it would be difficult for them to wake up, let alone their feet being smashed. After many days, the rain clouds dispersed, revealing the clean night sky. However, in the night sky, there were no stars in the past, only a white, round, bright object. What was that? There was a strange phenomenon in the sky. The night moon hung high in the sky. This strange and horrifying scene shocked all the humans, causing them to feel fear and uneasiness. Many people fainted from fright, and even more people knelt in their own courtyards or in front of their windows, worshipping. The royal families of various countries burned incense and worshipped the night, praying for Haotian's forgiveness for the disrespect of human beings. Many Taoist temples and temples were full of incense, and rumors began to spread in the human world that this was a precursor to the invasion of the underworld. It immediately caused a disaster even greater than the continuous rainstorm and floods, and many foolish people even chose to commit suicide. The West Hill Divine Palace announced to the world as quickly as possible that the object in the night sky was called the moon. It was a divine light bestowed by Haotian who pitied the people of the world for enduring the eternal night. With the spread of the decree of the Divine Hall and the forceful suppression of the royal families of various countries, the uproar caused by the thing called the moon slightly calmed down. As time passed, the people in the world began to get used to its existence. People discovered that the moon was different from the stars in the night sky in the past countless years. It was not absolutely silent and solemn. Instead, it moved and changed according to a certain pattern. There was the difference between brightness, and the change of shape was relatively stable. It was very suitable for calculating time and arranging farming work. Some people began to use the waxing and waning of the moon to calculate time, and shortened it to the moon. Of course, this was all in the future. There was a purple mountain in the southeast of Chang, a city of the Tang Empire. The terrain was relatively high, and there were relatively few rain clouds. It was convenient for watching the stars and the sky, so the imperial astronomer was set up here. Although the Tang Empire had been using Tianqi for more than a decade, the Tangs were famous for not believing in heaven and fate. Therefore, the imperial astronomer became the least important institution in the imperial court, and also the quietest yamen. Usually, there were few visitors, except for young couples who came to the Purple Mountain to enjoy the scenery. Today, the outside of the imperial astronomer was very lively. Dozens of Yulin royal guards surrounded several officials, standing below the stone steps, cutting off the connection between the inside and outside. Occasionally, passers-by passed by, but they were not surprised to see this scene, and did not think of other places. There was an extra moon in the night, so of course the imperial court had to ask the imperial astronomer for its opinion. The officials from the Ministry of Rites and the Yulin royal guards did not enter the imperial astronomer. Instead, it was a chief eunuch and several strong servant eunuchs who entered. Strangely, no one came to greet them. The chief eunuch looked gloomy and stared at the closed door of the main hall. He said coldly, "His Majesty is waiting for your reply, and the imperial court is waiting for your deduction and comments. You have to give them a reply today." The atmosphere in the imperial astronomer was extremely depressing and tense. In the main hall of the imperial astronomer, there were many instruments used for stargazing. Walking through the side door and straight up to the balcony, one could even see a huge sky telescope that the Academy had just sent over last year. At this moment, on the small table in the hall, there were only a few plates of very common dishes and several jars of wine. Two very depressed people were sitting there, drinking without tasting anything. One of them was the supervisor Miao Keqi, and the other was the deputy supervisor Su Liangshou. They were the two most important officials in the imperial astronomer. The cold voice of the eunuch came from outside the door. "You imperial astronomer have always thought that you could understand the will of heaven. Back then, you ignored the anger of the former emperor and insisted on commenting. Now that there is a strange phenomenon today, you can't say anything?" Miao Keqi looked at the closed door and revealed a gloomy smile. He drank the wine in his cup and looked at Su Liangshou. "Did you hear that? After all, it is still because of what happened back then." Su Liangshou was silent, holding the wine pot and filling up his cup for him. "That year, I observed the celestial phenomena and learned something, so I wrote 8 words on the almanac. Night covers the stars, the country will not be at peace. His Majesty ordered me to erase these 8 words for the stability of the court, but I refused." Miao Keqi sighed and said, "Who would have thought that these 8 words would cause such a stir? Countless people died in the palace and in the court. The princess was forced to marry into the wilderness, and the empress has not been involved in political affairs since then. Countless people want me dead. It's only because His Majesty looks after me that I can live to this day." He picked up the wine cup and stared blankly for a while. Then, he brought it to his lips and slowly drank it. He said with a dull expression, "Now that His Majesty has passed away, who can protect me?" Su Liangshou looked at His Excellency's expression and knew that he was ready to die. He felt slightly nervous and sincerely persuaded. Now that the new emperor has ascended the throne, Her Royal Highness is still in charge of the country, but the Empress and the 6th Prince have not returned. Whether it is His Majesty or Her Royal Highness, they are not willing to cause discussion in this situation. If it is light, it will cause opposition. If it is heavy, it will shake the country. Miao Keqi looked at him quietly and said, "Her Highness has always been virtuous. Of course, she will not force me to die because of what happened in the past. But you should know what she only wants to hear about this bright moon." Su Liangshou was silent. As the aide-de-camp of the imperial astronomer, he was very clear of Her Highness's intentions. Since in that starless night, the imperial astronomer's annotation had been directed at Her Highness, then now that the moon was in the sky, why couldn't the imperial astronomer do the same and point at the Empress who had yet to return to the capital? In reality, I have watched the stars for so many years. Other than that night when the stars dimmed, I have not seen any other changes in the stars. So the job of stargazing in the Imperial Astronomer is really meaningless. For some reason, Miao Kechi's mood suddenly improved. He repeatedly raised his cup to persuade and said with a slightly tipsy tone, "But this moon is different. Look at the waxing and waning of the moon in the night sky. It is orderly and has subtle changes in between. Whether it is to study the calendar or to observe the sky, there is great potential. It is a pity that I do not have much chance." Hearing this, Su Liangshu couldn't help but feel a wave of nervousness. He repeatedly urged, "Since Her Highness is kind and virtuous, why don't you take advantage of the situation?" Miao Kechi's eyes widened and stared into his eyes. He said in a low voice, "In the beginning, the Imperial Astronomer was held by the Grand Scribe. It was because the will of heaven and the people's hearts cannot be deceived in the history books. Why did I make that annotation against my will? According to the laws of the Tang Empire and the old rules passed down by the Ministry of Personnel, if I pass away, you will be the supervisor of the Imperial Astronomer. Now I am forced into a corner because I have a good-for-nothing son who has been blackmailed by the siblings in the palace. But you are different. You are upright in body and mind and have no ties. After I pass away, you cannot bring shame to the Imperial Astronomer." Su Liangshu was silent for a long time and gently nodded. Seeing this, Miao Kechi breathed a sigh of relief and slowly said, "The former emperor's reign was called Tianqi. Many people don't know the true reason behind it. Even I don't know. Now it seems that the headmaster of the academy has passed away, His Majesty has returned to heaven, and all the old ministers and pillars have followed suit. This is probably the original meaning of Tianqi. The will of heaven cannot be defied." Miao Kechi's voice suddenly became stern. He said, "But the people's hearts cannot be deceived. Even if man cannot defeat heaven, but we can choose not to follow heaven. What can heaven do to us?" The door to the main hall of the Imperial Astronomer finally opened. Looking at the body of Miao Kechi, the supervisor of the Imperial Astronomer, who had committed suicide by drinking poisoned wine, the chief eunuch's face became extremely ugly. His voice became more and more shrill and trembling, extremely unpleasant to hear. "How dare you! How dare you! How dare you commit suicide to escape punishment?" Su Liangshu stood at the side and watched the scene expressionlessly. He thought of what His Excellency had said before committing suicide and looked at the furious eunuch. He could not help but reveal a mocking smile. A person who did not even care about his life was certainly courageous enough. How could a person who was not even afraid of death be afraid of punishment? He did not even care about his life. Even Hao Yin could not do anything to him. What could the siblings in the palace do to him? Today there are 4 chapters. This is the first chapter. There are still 3 chapters to go. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 702. When the officials from the Ministry of Rites learned of the death of the Imperial Astronomer, Sir Miao, they left in a hurry, their expressions complicated. The chief eunuch indicated for Su Liangshu to follow him into the side room and sat down on a chair. With a dark and ugly expression, he said, "Do you know what to do next?" Su Liangshu said respectfully, "Please enlighten me, eunuch." The chief eunuch lightly tapped the table and said, "I don't know the art of stargazing, so I'll listen to you." After a moment of silence, Su Liangshu said, "Gonggong, do you really want me to write it?" The leader of the eunuchs was extremely anxious and shouted, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and get this done." Su Liangshu no longer hesitated. He walked to the table and wrote down 8 words. "The dark moon has invaded the stars, and the country will not be at peace." Many years ago, the imperial astronomer of the Tang dynasty observed the sudden darkening of the starry night and wrote these words. Many years later, when the moon appeared in the night sky, the official of the imperial astronomer wrote another 8 words without even looking at it. The chief eunuch's expression was extremely ugly. It was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. The anger in his eyes was like a flame. He gritted his teeth and said, "What does Lord Su mean by this?" Su Liangshu said calmly, "I am the deputy of the imperial astronomer. After the death of His Excellency, according to the laws of the Tang Empire and related regulations, the order of succession does not need to be discussed by the court. Since you want me to comment, I will do it. What's wrong with that?" The head eunuch was so angry that he laughed. Pointing at Su Kei's nose, he laughed dryly and said, "What a good Lord Su." Su Liangshu's expression suddenly turned serious. He knocked away the eunuch's skinny finger and shouted sternly, "I called you Gong Gong and asked you to clarify. Calling yourself lowly official is just giving some face to the nobles in the palace. I am a dignified fourth-rank official. How dare a mere eunuch like you treat me with such disrespect? How dare you? How dare you?" The chief eunuch trembled in anger. "Do you want to die?" Su Liangshu's face was as cold as ice as he shouted, "Die? Do you really think that the laws of the Tang Empire are just for show? Let me tell you and the noble behind you that I am not Sir Miao. I do not have an unfilial son who accidentally killed people in a street brawl, nor do I have an elder brother-in-law who is corrupt and takes bribes. I'm all alone. It won't be that easy for me to die. Get lost." As soon as he finished speaking, he slapped the eunuch's face heavily. The applause was resounding. The Imperial Center Administration of the Tang Empire was responsible for managing the cultivators on behalf of the imperial court. In the hearts of ordinary people, and even ordinary officials, this institution seemed very mysterious. But the location of the Imperial Center Administration was not mysterious. It was just a little remote. It was in a small building 4 miles to the east of Vermilion Bird Avenue, facing the garden of the military ministry. After the continuous rain, it seemed that it would not rain again in a short period of time. But today, there was a yellow paper umbrella on the table on the 3rd floor of the Imperial Center Administration. The surface of the umbrella was slightly wet. He Mingshi held a piece of snow-white silk cloth and carefully and slowly wiped the water droplets on the umbrella, as if he did not see the sweat on Zhuge Wuren's forehead. Zhuge Wuren was the chief official of the Tang Empire's Imperial Center Administration. Everyone knew that he was a loyal dog of the Empress. When the new emperor ascended the throne, his situation inevitably became passive and panicky. As the saying goes, every emperor has his own ministers. Lord Zhuge should have known about the changes in the situation long ago. Why are you still running around in vain? Do you want to overthrow the edict of the late emperor? It's very unwise. He Mingshi put the silk cloth into his sleeve, raised his head, and said calmly to the opposite side. Zhuge Wuren looked at the young man in Taoist robes opposite him, and the sweat on his forehead increased. He had never thought that his whereabouts these days were all under the other party's control. He was actually very familiar with He Mingshi. In the past few years, as the main source of power for the Imperial Center Administration, the Southern Gate Temple, He Mingshi had always been responsible for cooperating with him. He had always respected He Mingshi, but it was mainly because he respected his sect and his teacher, who was the nation master. It was not until today that he realized that he was wrong. What He Mingshi respected the most was himself. "What are you trying to say, Master He?" "I'm just drinking tea and chatting with some old friends. If you want to frame me and overthrow the edict of the late emperor, I can't accept it." Zhuge Wuren's voice was a little hoarse. When He Mingshi walked slowly into the Imperial Center Administration, he did not hear any warning. His voice was almost hoarse, because he knew that no matter what he said, it would be difficult to be heard. The reason why the late emperor agreed to the Empress's suggestion to let you be the supervisor of the Imperial Center Administration was because you were an ordinary person. You did not sympathize with cultivators, nor did you have the innate reverence other ordinary people had for cultivators. This was an advantage, but also a fatal weakness. He Mingshi said, after so many years, which cultivator in the Imperial Center administration would sincerely obey you? Once you don't have the authority in your hands, you can't order them at all. Zhuge Warren felt that the person sitting in front of him was a poisonous snake. He said, I really did not expect that the Southern Gate Temple's infiltration of the Imperial Center administration would be so terrifying. But don't forget, I am still the supervisor. Although those people did not dare to stop you from coming to see me, they did not have the guts to help you kill me. He Mingshi looked at him with pity and said, I am a cultivator. Although I am not as great as Ning Kai and Chen Pipi, why would I need help to kill an ordinary person like you? Zhuge Warren shouted sternly, I don't believe you have the guts to kill an official of the imperial court. He Mingshi said, I do not dare, but Lord Zhuge, do not forget that the new emperor has already ascended the throne. He only needs to issue an imperial decree to take away your official position. By then, what will you have left? More beads of sweat appeared on Zhuge Warren's forehead. He said, In that case, what are you waiting for? His Majesty has just ascended the throne, and he wants to kill the Empress's loyal dog. This will not look good in the eyes of the court officials. Moreover, you have been in charge of the Imperial Center administration for many years. I believe you have some secrets and unknown powers. His Majesty does not want unnecessary losses because of the conflict between the Emperor and his officials. He Mingshi looked at him and said with a smile, So His Majesty wants you to resign. Zhuge Warren stared at him and said mockingly, Do you think I am so stupid? This has nothing to do with stupidity. It has to do with the current situation. Even if you still have some trump cards that are not in our control, the general situation is already in our control. You can't overturn the sky. He Mingshi stopped smiling and said, Lord Zhuge is grieving over the death of the previous emperor and is suffering from a serious illness. He sincerely asks to resign. His Majesty and Her Highness will pity you for your hard work and allow you to live in Chang'an. If His Majesty takes away your official position, you will be sent to another county. Zhuge Warren's hands trembled slightly when he heard this. It seems that Lord Zhuge is also very clear about the difference. Yes, you have followed the Empress all your life and done many dirty things. You have ordered cultivators around like pigs and dogs and offended many sections. If you do not have the support of the imperial court, as long as you leave Chang'an, you will only be left with a dead end. After saying this, He Mingshi picked up the yellow paper umbrella from the table and put it under his armpit. He walked out of the Imperial Center administration. There was no sound of wind or rain outside the hall tonight. Liu felt a little uncomfortable and her mood was a little unsettled. She read a few memorials but could not calm down. She did not even clearly see what was written in the memorials. Now that her brother had ascended to the throne, her position as regent should have been invalid. However, both the new emperor and the officials of the two factions in the imperial court had a tacit understanding and asked her to continue to be the regent. The emperor wanted her to continue to review the memorials because he believed in his sister's ability in government affairs and to express his gratitude and closeness. The officials of the princess's faction insisted on this because they did not trust the new emperor's ability in government affairs. As for the officials of the empress's faction, who knew what they were secretly thinking, Liu casually flipped through the thick memorials. Suddenly, her fingers froze and her expression became solemn. This was because at the bottom of the memorials, she saw Zhuge Warren's resignation. The candlelight shone on the table and the screen, as well as on her uncertain face. Looking at the resignation of the loyal dog of the Empress, she thought of many things that had happened in the imperial court recently. Since the new emperor ascended the throne, Chang'an seemed to be stable, but in fact, there were undercurrents surging under the surface. Those ministers and generals who were still loyal to the Empress often contacted each other privately. The contents of their conversations could be guessed without asking. There was also a big dispute in the imperial court. The palace was determined to change the year name as soon as possible and completely confirm the matter of the new emperor's succession. The officials of the empress's faction, on the other hand, used the reason that the former emperor's coffin had not returned and the empress dowager was far away in the wilderness, strongly requested for the change to be delayed, at least until the former emperor was buried. The reason for putting filial piety first was very sufficient. Neither Li Yu nor His Majesty could stop it. They could only agree with the suggestion of the court officials and decided to send a team to Helan City to welcome the coffin when the rain stopped. Li Yu was very clear about the importance of changing the year name to the throne. This was originally the first major event after the new emperor ascended the throne. In the end, they were forced to return without accomplishing anything. Therefore, she guessed that her brother would be very angry. However, she did not expect that he would start to act without her knowing. Under the illumination of the candlelight, she carefully read Zhuge Warren's resignation. She wanted to see something deeper in the details of the resignation, but she found nothing. Because the former emperor's coffin had not returned, the new emperor did not move into the main hall. He still lived in the side hall of the previous years. However, the side hall now was much more lively and prosperous than the main hall. Tonight, the palace suddenly became quiet again. Other than the two most trusted chief eunuchs guarding the door, there was no one else in the quiet hall except for the sister and brother. Back then, I heard from my father that ruling a country is like frying a small fish. Don't flip it casually. Let nature take its course and act cautiously. Don't be impatient. Li Yu looked at her brother and softly persuaded, "You are now the emperor of the Tang Empire. As long as you go with the flow, those clowns can't shake you at all. Why do you act rashly?" Li Huiyuan said with a smile, "I was wondering what it was that made you so nervous and cautious. It turned out to be a resignation. Yes, I sent someone to make Zhuge Warren resign. Everyone in the Tang Empire knows that the sinister villain is a dog of that woman. I don't want to see that hateful face in the palace again." Li Yu looked at his expression and knew that he did not take her words to heart. She said solemnly, "You have to know that Chang'an cannot be broken from the outside. The only danger comes from within. Your Majesty, you are now Chang'an. As long as you don't mess up, you can last for thousands of years." Hearing these sincere words, Li Huiyuan lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Then he looked up at Li Yu and said, "In fact, I also understand this. But as you said, the danger of Chang'an is inside." During the 2 days when the edict was read, the minister of the Ministry of Rites went to the Southern Gate Temple and Zhuge Warren went to the academy. "Don't you know what they want to do?" Li Yu was silent. She was not worried about the Southern Gate Temple, especially after the death of the nation, Master Li Qingshan. It was impossible for anyone to know what happened that night. However, the academy had never expressed its attitude, which was what really made her feel uneasy. The academy had always been closed. Not to mention the ministers loyal to the queen, even the messengers she sent could only see the ordinary staff of the academy. Not even a professor could be seen. If it was because of the death of the headmaster of the academy, it was understandable that the academy was closed. But what were the professors doing? What were the people on the second floor of the academy who were qualified to influence the imperial court doing now? Sister, those people can't be reconciled. They would rather die than admit that father chose me to succeed the throne. They will only think that we are weak if we are lenient to these unscrupulous people." Li Huiyuan looked at his sister and said fiercely. Hearing this, Li Yu's heart trembled. In fact, until this moment, Li Huiyuan really thought that the name on the edict was his. He had no idea what she had sacrificed for it. At this time, Li Huiyuan's self-confidence was like a kind of mockery to her, a mockery of herself. She suddenly felt sad and tired. She didn't want to continue this topic, but she suddenly remembered the news she had heard when she was walking in the palace. She frowned and said, "What about the imperial astronomer?" Li Huiyuan was startled and didn't know how to answer. Seeing this, Li Yu knew that it was true. She scolded him severely. Miao Keqi was upright and had a good reputation in the imperial court. You actually sent an internal official to force him to death. Do you want to turn against the officials? Li Huiyuan lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Then he said, I did make a mistake in this matter. Li Yu knew that her brother had a very stubborn side. She didn't expect him to admit his mistake so quickly. She couldn't help but be stunned. However, before she could react, Li Huiyuan raised his head. He said calmly and firmly, "But I won't regret it, because I want him to die." Li Yu looked at him and asked, "Why? Why? It was Miao Keqi, the old bastard, who annotated those damn words and forced you to marry far away. I will never forget the night you knelt in front of Father's palace. I will never forget the tears you shed on the night before you got married." Li Huiyuan looked at his sister and said coldly, "So he must die. There are 2 more chapters. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 703. Of course, Li Yu didn't forget the night when she knelt in front of her father's palace and asked to be married to the wilderness. She didn't forget the night when she cried silently before she got married. But as time went by, she buried the sadness in her heart and sometimes even thought that she had forgotten it. She didn't expect that her brother, who was still young at that time, would always remember those things. He hid it in his heart for so many years and finally broke out after he ascended the throne. At this moment, apart from being touched and a touch of sadness, what else could she feel? Naturally, she couldn't reprimand him again. Besides Miao Keqi, there's also that woman. If she hadn't added fuel to the flames around Father, if her ministers hadn't added fuel to the fire, how could the imperial astronomer's commentary have caused such a big turmoil? How could you have been forced to marry those abominable barbarians in the wilderness? Li Huiyuan's voice became colder and colder. He reached out to hold Li Yu's hand and said, "Don't worry, sister. Now that I'm the emperor of the Tang Empire, no one dares to bully me and you like before. Miao Keqi's death is just the beginning. I will also make that woman stay in Helan City and never return to Chang'an." Hearing this, Li Yu suddenly came to her senses. She held his hand tightly and stared into his eyes. She said with a very serious expression, "I have already made arrangements in Helan City. You must not mess around. After all, in name, that woman is our mother and now the Empress Dowager. If you want to do something to her, you need the right time and reason. She must return to Chang'an. What we need to do now is to delay her return." Li Huiyuan had something to say. Li Yu shook her head and looked at him seriously. "I know there are rumors in Chang'an City that the edict is fake, so you are a little uneasy. But rumors can only be rumors. I also know that Lord Su wrote that the Dark Moon invaded the Star Empire and the country will not be peaceful. That was just what he did when he was angry. Don't make things difficult for him. Your Majesty, you must remember that the edict is not the key, that woman is not the key, and the imperial astronomer's commentary is not the key. The key is who the civil and military officials in the court and the people support." Li Yu's words made sense. As an emperor, he should have this kind of breadth of mind and magnanimity. Even if he needed means to govern, he could not rely on those petty means. But she didn't make it clear. The edict and the imperial astronomer were not the key. But the Empress in Helan City was the key to Li Huiyuan's throne. Besides that, the most important thing was the attitude of the military and the academy. Li Yu was most worried about the academy and that woman in Helan City. At this moment, she suddenly began to miss Ningquebec. If Ning Ke were still in Chang'an, everything would be much smoother. However, his father liked Ning Ke very much, and Ning Ke must have some true feelings for his father. If he knew that Ning Ke had tampered with his father's edict, would his attitude toward Ning Ke change? The light carriage moved silently in the darkness of the imperial palace, and finally stopped in front of a quiet hall. Liu got off the carriage and waved to the eunuchs and palace maids not to follow her into the palace. This palace had a special status in the imperial palace. It was the bedroom of the empress. Liu felt that she was a little weak at this time, so she came here. Every time she came to this palace, she would always feel a lot of anger, and anger would often turn into strength. The owner of this palace was still far away in Helan City and had not returned. So there were only a few candles in the hall, and it was a little dark. Even so, the magnificent furnishings in the hall could still be seen clearly. The palace maids and eunuchs in the hall were all driven out. So there was only Liu in the hall at this time. She stood quietly in front of the phoenix bed embroidered with brocade and inlaid with jade. Suddenly, there was a hint of mockery on her face. Her mother should have been the real and only empress, but she had been sick and died many years ago. She had never slept on this phoenix bed that should have belonged to her. The woman who slept on this bed was very beautiful and gentle. From her father to her uncle to second Uncle Chow, everyone had persuaded her to call her mother when she was young. But she had never called her mother. It was not until she grew up that she began to call her mother. Every time she called her mother, a drop of blood would flow from her heart. For more than 10 years, there were many mottled scars on her heart, and she had never really recovered. She had to admit that her father and that woman did not treat her too badly. But she could not forgive them because she always remembered the day her mother died. That day, she greeted her mother happily and climbed into bed to play with her newborn brother. Then, for some reason, her mother began to cough up blood in pain and then closed her eyes. The imperial physicians kept going in and out, but her mother still did not open her eyes. But her father was not there. Her father was beside that woman. Liu stood quietly on the ground and looked at the phoenix bed. She did not know if she saw her mother or that woman. Her fists slowly clenched and her body began to tremble. This was the feeling of anger. With the trembling caused by anger, that familiar power returned to her body. She gradually calmed down and turned to walk out of the hall. Even if that woman returned to Chang'an City, she could not sleep on this bed again. After returning to her palace, Liu continued to review the memorials. Her efficiency was much higher than before, but there were too many memorials, and it was obvious that she could not finish them in a short time. She rubbed her eyebrows tiredly and ordered a eunuch to serve her a cup of strong tea. Then, she ordered a maid to wet a towel with boiling water and soak her face. She felt a little refreshed. When she finally finished reviewing all the memorials, the morning light penetrated through the hall door. She rubbed her sore wrists and ignored the eunuch's persuasion. She ordered someone to invite 2 people into the palace to talk. Everything that had happened in the court over the past few days had been within her expectations. However, she had not expected His Majesty to be so impatient. Although she did not agree with the Emperor's tough methods, she would not lower her vigilance against the Empress's ministers. Under the current circumstances, she must first firmly control Chang'an City. The most important thing to control Chang'an City was the army. The Yulin Royal Guards were the most important, followed by the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. As for the bodyguard office responsible for the palace's security, it was also the most important. Once there was chaos, in addition to the army, there was another place in Chang'an City that was very important. That was the Chang'an local government, which had enough bailiffs and arresters and was familiar with the city's terrain. So, one of the 2 people she wanted to see was the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City, Shangguan Yangyu. There was another man named Chao Xiaoshu. There is one more chapter. It may be a little later. I am a little tired. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 704. Shangguan Yangyu was the ugliest prefectural magistrate of Chang'an since the founding of the Tang Empire 1,000 years ago. He had a natural wretchedness from the inside out. Being famous for his ugly appearance naturally did not make people happy. However, neither he nor his old wife could deny this point. Therefore, as he stood in the grand and solemn hall, he felt increasingly ashamed of his inferiority. More and more sweat appeared on his forehead, and his triangular eyes flickered incessantly. Liu had seen Shangguan Yangyu several times and knew that he was extremely ugly. However, every time she saw him, she always felt that this person's ugliness seemed to have a new meaning. She could not help but feel disgusted. But she controlled her expression very well, and her speech was extremely respectful, as warm as the spring breeze. The reason for this was that she was very clear that the magistrate had a very rare strength and talent under such an unbearable appearance. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to stay in this critical and thorny position for so many years. Liu was very practical. As long as there was a real talent, even if Shangguan Yangyu's character was as ugly as his appearance, and he was extremely cunning and corrupt, she would still accept him. Moreover, even if Shangguan Yangyu had many shortcomings, there was a good story about him. After he obtained the scholarly honors, he did not abandon his plain-looking wife, and he still had a deep relationship with her. This made Liu admire him very much. In addition, the position of prefectural magistrate of Chang'an was very important. Therefore, after the new emperor ascended the throne, he was the first minister she met in the palace. Logically speaking, this was a heaven-sent opportunity for Shangguan Yangyu. For someone like him who had never cared about morality, there was no psychological barrier for him to become the disciple of the princess and the new emperor. Faced with the vague solicitation from Her Highness's words, he should immediately bow to them. However, what surprised Liu and the few people in the hall was that although Shangguan Yangyu's attitude was respectful and kept flattering her, and he even wanted to lie on the ground to kiss Liu's feet, once the conversation became a little deeper, he would open his eyes wide like an idiot and did not know what to say at all. Liu frowned slightly. Of course, she knew that Shangguan Yangyu would not be so stupid that he could not understand what she said. So, this person's pretending to be stupid could only mean that his and some of the minister's attitudes were not firm enough. What made her even more depressed was that the second person she wanted to see today refused to enter the palace. The leader of the eunuchs and the old mama were incessantly reprimanding that man for his disrespect. Their expressions were indignant, as if they were itching to immediately send the Yulin royal guards to capture that man and bring him into the palace to be punished. "All of you, shut up!" Liu shouted and waved her hand to chase all the eunuchs, palace maids and the nanny closest to her out of the hall. Cao Xiaoshu was not an ordinary person. Even if she had such status and power, she still did not dare to be impolite, let alone think about hurting this person. He was the leader of the underworld in Chang'an. Even though he had not been involved in the affairs of Jianghu for many years and had not paid attention to the affairs of the Fish Dragon Gang since he returned to Chang'an last year, everyone knew that the dark world of Chang'an was still under his rule. However, if Cao Xiaoshu was just a big shot in Jianghu, any minister in the court would not take a second look at him. Naturally, Liu would not be so troubled. The key was that Cao Xiaoshu was a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state and had a brotherly relationship with her father. When she saw him, she had to call him second Uncle Cao. It was also because Cao Xiaoshu had many good brothers who were willing to die for him. In some ways, those good brothers were related to the safety of Chang'an. After the eunuchs and palace maids were chased out, Liu was not the only one left in the hall. There was also a middle-aged minister. It was Mo Han, the Grand Secretary of the Martial Heroic Hall, who had entered the cabinet 4 years ago. "Your Highness, you don't have to worry for the time being. Cao Xiaoshu's refusal to enter the palace does not mean that he has any opinion of your Highness. Back then, when he refused the official position granted by His Majesty and left the palace, he had already shown his attitude. Today is just a continuation of that day. He wants your Highness to understand his determination not to participate in the court affairs." Emohan said with a smile. Li Yu frowned slightly and said, Chang San and Fei Lu are popular in the Yulin Royal Guards. Lu Wu is now the commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. After Chen Qi returned to the bodyguard office, he became Su Chongshan's right-hand man. These people only follow Chao Xiaoshu's orders. If father was still alive, they would not dare to have any disloyalty. But now that father has passed away, if Chao Xiaoshu had any ideas, Chang An would be in danger. I do not want to give orders to others. Emohan's smile faded and he asked, Then how does your highness think we should deal with Chao Xiaoshu? Li Yu was silent for a long time. She understood what the Grand Secretary meant and said, This is an old matter arranged by father. It can only be changed with time. Neither I nor Her Majesty can deal with it. Emohan said approvingly, That's right. His Majesty established the Fish Dragon Gang among the people. It seemed insignificant and was even criticized by the censor as nonsense. But who would have thought that the people in the Fish Dragon Gang have become such important figures now? These people will only be loyal to the former emperor, so they will definitely be loyal to the heir appointed by the former emperor, which is our emperor. Your Highness does not need to do anything. You just need to follow the old practice and maintain the good relationship with the family. I think Chao Xiaoshu will naturally understand your Highness's intentions. Li Yu said, The Grand Secretary's words make sense. I will make arrangements later. Except for the former emperor, no one can interfere with the Yulin Royal Guards, the Valiant Cavalry Battalion and the Bodyguard Office, including Her Majesty and the Prince. So many people died in the Spring Breeze Pavilion that rainy night. It was the former emperor who announced this. So in my opinion, there is no problem with the safety of Chang'an. Emohan's expression gradually became serious and he said, What I am worried about is the outside of the country. It is said that on the wilderness, the headmaster drew his sword and fought with Haotian. That is why the West Hill Coalition army turned against each other. Although the former emperor led the cavalry to defeat the enemy, now that the headmaster and the former emperor have passed away, the West Hill Divine Palace will definitely not miss this opportunity. Although the Tang Empire is strong, it has become the public enemy of the world. We are surrounded by strong enemies. If we are not careful, we will fall into a precarious situation. It is reported that Prince Long Qing has led the cavalry of the Left King's Palace to fight against the Tang Empire and is preparing to use the Yen Road to go south. Your Highness should advise His Majesty to think more about the military and horses, and not these trivial matters in the court. With the foreign enemies in front of us, we must not cause internal strife. Li Yu knew that the Grand Secretary was referring to the Imperial Astronomer and the Imperial Center Administration. She was slightly shocked and grateful that the Grand Secretary could point out His Majesty's mistake. She said, Rest assured, Grand Secretary. I will talk to His Majesty. Emohan nodded and said, That's good. Li Yu said again, You don't have to worry too much about the Left King's Palace fighting against the Tang Empire. Everyone knows that Long Qing is aiming for the throne of the Yen Kingdom by using the Yen Road to go south. Crown Prince Chongming and I have a deep friendship and have already expected this. General Xian Zhilong is wise and resourceful. He will naturally know what to do. As a civil official who had been supported by the princess in recent years, Emohan was naturally the most trusted of all. Of course, he knew that Xian Zhilong was Her Highness's man, so he was slightly relieved. We can ignore the conflict at the border of the Yen territory for now. What I am really worried about is the north. Emohan said worriedly, Now that Her Majesty is still in Helan City, the position of the northern military camp is even more special. We can't mess up, but we can't ignore it either. Does Your Highness have any arrangements for this? The northern military camp guarded the countless miles of the northern border of the Tang Empire. It had the most elite cavalry and bore the most dangerous mission. It had been confronting the powerful Golden Palace for many years. The current commander of the northern military camp was Su Qi, one of the 4 great generals of the Tang Empire. This general had always been calm and low-key. He was the most inconspicuous. However, whether it was Li Huiyuan who wanted to sit on the throne or the Tang Empire who wanted to fight against the whole world, Su Qi was an important figure that could not be ignored or bypassed. Among the former 4 great generals, Xia Ho, the Defender General of the army, was a trusted follower of the Queen. The current Defender General of the North, Xian Zhilong, was Li Yu's man. Only the Defender General of the state, Su Shi and Su Qi, were not biased. They were loyal and only loyal to the Tang Emperor, Li Zhongyi. What Grand Secretary Mo Han was worried about now was whether General Su Qi's loyalty to the former emperor could be transferred to the current emperor, or would it be transferred to another prince. Li Yu said, "General Su Qi will never participate in the succession of the throne. This is what my father told me a long time ago. So I believe he will remain neutral." Mo Han shook his head and said, "Since His Majesty has already ascended the throne, it is inappropriate for the general to remain neutral." Li Yu said, "The Grand Secretary's words make sense. So I have already sent Hua Shangyue." Mo Han frowned slightly and said, "General Hua Shanyue's loyalty to Her Highness is definitely not a problem. He is also related to General Su Qi's family by marriage. But these are meaningless." Li Yu said calmly, "Since I have given the most important task to Hua Shangyue, I believe he will be able to complete my task. Please rest assured." Shangguan Yangyu returned home from the palace and locked himself in the house. His old wife sat by the bed to serve the medicine. She asked worriedly, "Is he going to hit himself again?" Shangguan Yangyu sighed and said, "I'm afraid he will strangle himself with the white silk this time." His old wife was shocked and said, "The new emperor has ascended the throne. Her Highness is powerful. Since she values you, you should just agree. Why do you have to seek death?" Shangguan Yangyu stared at her with his triangular eyes and scolded, "What do you, an ignorant woman, know? Even if she is powerful, it depends on how long she can be powerful. If I become Her Highness's disciple, I can naturally earn a lot of money and get promoted. But what can I do when Her Majesty brings the prince back to Chang'an?" His old wife laughed when she heard this and said, "Master always talks about the law of the Tang Empire. How can you forget it now? His Majesty ascended the throne with a posthumous edict. Who dares to rebel against him? Who can rebel against him?" "I said you don't understand. The posthumous edict can't be fake. But Her Highness wants to see me first." "Why?" "It means that Her Highness is also worried about chaos in Chang'an." Shangguan Yangyu said, "Under what circumstances will Chang'an be in chaos? Of course, there will be people who are dissatisfied." His old wife was even more confused. She put the medicine on the table and asked seriously, "Who can cause trouble?" Shangguan Yangyu sneered and said, "Now the ministers in the imperial court, whether they are on the side of Her Majesty or Her Highness, they all don't understand one thing. In my opinion, even His Majesty and Her Highness don't understand that the posthumous edict is not the key. Chang'an is not the key. Even those generals are not the key." His old wife asked curiously, "Then what is the key?" Shangguan Yangyu said, "The Academy's attitude is the key." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 705. At this moment, there were not many people like Shangguan Yangyu who could be as calm and clear as he could accurately find the most crucial point in this complicated world. Chao Xiaoshu's house was located on the 2nd street of the Spring Breeze Pavilion in the eastern city. He held the child and sat beside his father, whispering to him. He dipped the tip of his chopsticks into the wine and brought it to the child's mouth. Before the child could lick it out of curiosity, Lindsay snatched it away and glared at him. Today was old Chow's birthday. There was no big banquet at the Chow mansion. Only those close to him were invited. The brothers of the Fish Dragon gang had taken leave from their respective yamen and came early with gifts. Thinking of the new emperor's ascension to the throne and the turbulence in Chang'an City, the Chao mansion must be hosting a banquet because his elder brother had something to say. After everyone kowtowed to old Master Chao, they quietly waited for his instructions. Unexpectedly, Chao Xiaoshu did not say anything superfluous during the banquet. It was a picture of a peaceful family. At this moment, the steward of the Chao mansion hurried in and whispered a few words. The people at the banquet were slightly surprised, but Chao Xiaoshu did not react. He said indifferently, "What gifts did Her Highness give?" The steward took out the gift list and reported it carefully, not daring to make any mistake. Most of the gifts that Li Yu sent to the Chao mansion were given to old Chao. There was a boxwood cane, a longevity mountain stone, a lake crab from the Great Lake, 9 River double distilled rice from Hebei County, cosmetics and silk from Chenjinji Cosmetic Store for Madame Chao, and the rest were toys for the child. Hearing the steward's voice, Chao Xiaoshu raised his eyebrows. He did not expect Her Highness to give such simple gift. After a moment of silence, he said, "Continue eating and drinking." So the brothers continued eating and drinking. After the banquet, old Chao went to the back garden to watch the opera. Madame Chao Xiaoshu took the child to rest. All the stewards and servants were asked to leave the flower hall. Only the brothers of the fish dragon gang were left. Chao Xiaoshu gently swirled the teacup in his hand and said, "You guys are no longer the Jianghu men you used to be. You have to keep a low profile, especially Chen 7. You don't have to worry about the bodyguard's schedule these days. Even if Su Chongshan suspects you, you don't have to worry about it. Chi 4, tell the brothers in the gang to keep quiet." He hadn't been in charge of the affairs of the fish dragons for a long time, but his words were still like an imperial edict to the fish dragons. On the surface, Chang Siwei and the others had already left the fish dragons and were working in the imperial court, but they would never object to his arrangements. They wouldn't even ask about it. The only person who would ask was Chen Qi, because he was the brains of the fish dragons. What about fifth brother's side? Chen 7 looked at the silent middle-aged man sitting on the right side and said, "Your Highness's response is very appropriate. We can only accept it. But fifth brother is now in charge of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. The palace certainly can't let him continue to be silent. We need him to give a clear attitude." Chao Xiaoshu put down his teacup and said, "Many of our brothers are now serving in the imperial court. Since we are officials, of course we have to share the burden of the imperial court. According to the old law of the Tang Empire, we should do what we have to do." There was silence in the flower hall. Although everyone admitted that what Chao Xiaoshu said was right, it was not the past. There were many things that they still didn't understand. Chen 7 looked at his brothers and frowned slightly. He said, "I understand what everyone is worried about, but I think there is no need to worry. There can't be a problem with the edict because it can be too easily exposed. When His Majesty passed away, there were at least tens of thousands of people in Helan City who could testify." Lu Wu remained silent. He was now the highest official and the most important position. Only now did he look at Chao Xiaoshu and asked with a serious expression, "Big brother, did His Majesty tell you who the throne would be passed on to?" Chao Xiaoshu shook his head. He thought of the real big brother of the fish dragons and his former friend. Now that he couldn't see him anymore, he couldn't help but feel tired. "During this time, don't do anything," he said. Chi 4 had a headache and asked, "Are we just going to wait like this?" Chao Xiaoshu said, "What we have to do is wait." "Wait for what?" "Wait for Her Majesty and Master Huang Yang to return to Chang'an. What if they don't come back? That means there is a problem." The horses' hooves were flying, and the soaked turf was kicked up into pieces. More than 10 Tang cavalrymen rode into the northern military camp. Both the cavalrymen and the horses looked very tired. Their bodies were covered with rainwater and mud, and they looked very embarrassed. After checking the documents, the captain of the northern military camp welcomed the cavalrymen into the camp as fast as he could. Then he summoned the soldiers to prepare hot water and food for the guests. The leader of the Tang cavalrymen said, "I want to see the general. We can talk about other things later." The captain was shocked. He thought that in such a short time, they must be very tired and painful to come to the northern military camp from the Gushan commandery. They didn't even rest and wanted to see the general. What had happened? The young general from the Gushan commandery was Hua Shangyue. This man had a strong family background and the full support of the princess. At a young age, he became the military supervisor of the three states. The troops under his command were stationed in the Gushan commandery. Both his status and strength were not to be underestimated. He proposed to see the general as soon as possible, and the northern military camp couldn't find any reason to refuse. In the general's mansion, General Su Qi looked at the gloomy sky outside the window and kept silent for a long time. Then he turned around and looked at Hua Shangyue, saying, "You left before the rain stopped?" Hua Shangyue replied respectfully, "Yes, uncle." Su Qi said, "Young people are always so impatient. You should know that war is a big deal. You must be careful. As the military supervisor of the three states, you left the camp alone, which is against the military rules. If you had an accident on the road, how would you explain it to the imperial court, not to mention how sad your parents would be?" Hua Shangyue suppressed his exhaustion and said, "It was urgent, so I came in a hurry." General Su Qi had always been low-key and calm. Even when he heard the words urgent, his expression didn't change. After another long silence, he said slowly, "Do you know that I didn't want to see you?" Hua Shangyue knew that the general had already guessed his intention. He smiled and said, "But you chose to see me in the end, which means you are willing to listen to what I have to say." Su Qi said, "I know what you are about to say is what Her Highness or His Majesty wants to say to me. But I still suggest that you don't say it." Hua Shangyue was slightly startled and asked, "Why?" Su Qi said, "Because it would be disrespectful, and I don't want to tie you up myself." Hua Shangyue said, "If you still think it's disrespectful after listening to what I have to say, I won't complain even if you cut off my head, let alone tie me up." Su Qi quietly looked into his eyes and said, "The provisions that the northern military camp sent to Helan City left the city the moment the rain stopped. Do you think what you have to say is still meaningful?" Hua Shangyue said sincerely, "The general has misunderstood His Majesty and Her Highness. No one has ever thought of cutting off the food supply of Helan City, and no one would be shameless enough to play tricks on the Tang soldiers. His Highness's request to the general is actually very simple. He just hopes that you can slow down your subsequent actions." Su Qi slowly raised his eyebrows and asked in a cold voice, "Why slow down?" Hua Shangyue did not flinch and said, "Uncle, you have always been known for your calmness. That's why the former emperor trusted you with the northern military camp. Now that the new emperor has ascended the throne, Chang'an is not peaceful. The later Her Majesty returns to Chang'an, the more stable the Tang Empire will be. If so, why can't you slow down?" Su Qi said in a low voice, "His Majesty is still in Helan City. Do you want me to ignore him?" Hua Shangyue said, "His Majesty will return to Chang'an one day, but Chang'an can't afford a turmoil." What a naive statement. Su Qi said expressionlessly, "If that's all, it will be hard for Her Highness to convince me. On the contrary, I will start to doubt Her Highness' intention." Hua Shangyue said, "The edict was announced in front of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court. If there was a problem, I believe that someone in Chang'an would have secretly informed you. But until now, no one, including the Empress's party, has secretly informed you. So your suspicion is meaningless." There was a sudden commotion in front of the general's mansion. Hua Shangyue said, "The military situation is urgent. Uncle, deal with it first. We will continue to talk about this later." After a while, Su Qi finished dealing with the military situation and returned to the room. He looked at Hua Shangyue, who was standing by the bookshelf reading a book but was actually lost in thought. He said, "There is some movement in the Golden Tribe royal court." Hua Shangyue did not expect the general to inform him of the urgent military situation. He frowned and said, "I rushed here from the Gushan commandery and changed horses 4 times on the way. I know better than anyone how dangerous the road is after the rain. The wilderness must be even more difficult. The carriages can barely pass through, but how can a large number of cavalries move? The grassland cavalries are relatively light and have an advantage over the Tang cavalry in this kind of weather. In this case, uncle, you should be more cautious. All in all, you just want to persuade me to move slower to help Helan City." General Su Chi stared into his eyes and said, "Don't use the possibility of an ambush from the Golden Tribe royal court to influence my judgment. Because my cavalries will never be ambushed. Her Highness is a smart man. She knows that I will only listen to His Majesty and act according to the law of the Tang Empire. If you want to persuade me, you must have other means." Hua Shangyue took out a few files tightly wrapped in oilcloth and gently put them on the table. "According to Her Highness's original intention, it would be best if you could persuade me without these files. Because once these files are spread, it will be a great stain to the reputation of the Tang Empire and the former emperor." Su Chi's expression became serious when he heard his serious words. He walked to the desk and slowly opened the files. As he read, his eyes became colder and colder. "The Tang Empire is not safe. Of course, I have no Christmas Eve. There is another chapter at work. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 706. After reading the dossiers on the desk, Su Chi's first reaction was disbelief. He looked up at Hua Shangyue coldly and said, "That's ridiculous. That's despicable." Hua Shangyue was not surprised by the general's reaction. Even he, an important general sent by the princess, could not believe it when he first heard the secret. It was unbelievable that the Empress of the Tang Empire was the saintess of the devil's doctrine. Just like the general, he thought it was the princess's vicious trick. "I didn't believe it at first, but the evidence is conclusive. I have to believe it," he said gloomily. "We have the testimony of the nation, Master Li Qingshan. The most important thing is the relationship between the Empress and Xiahou. As long as we can prove this, we can prove everything else." Su Chi thought of the dossiers that the Southern Gate Temple secretly retrieved from the divine halls of West Hill. He then compared it with the old dossiers in the palace and deduced the result. His hands suddenly trembled. "Uncle, have you ever heard of the Empress getting sick or injured all these years? When the Qingqing Hall of the palace was on fire, the Empress rushed into the fire with her personal eunuchs and nannies to save the people. It was a good story and everyone praised her for being strong, kind, and courageous. However, who noticed that the eunuchs and nannies were all burned? Only the Empress, who rushed into the fire 3 times, was not injured at all?" Hua Shangyue said solemnly, "Uncle, don't forget that we Tangs are also believers of Haotian. Although the empire is open-minded and tolerant, I have never heard that the devil's doctrine is tolerant. After Mr. Ku of the Academy destroyed the devil's doctrine, the remnants of the devil's doctrine sneaked south and made such a big conspiracy. Xiahou and the Empress were the 2 most important people in this conspiracy. Are you going to let the devil's doctrine succeed?" Su Chi's expression became extremely serious. He suddenly said, "Now the West Hill Divine Palace wants to take advantage of the death of the headmaster and His Majesty to attack the Tang Empire. At this dangerous moment, I don't care about the difference between the Orthodox and the devil. As long as the devil's doctrine can make the Tang Empire stronger, so what?" Hua Shangyue was slightly shocked. After all, he was still too young. He was not like Su Chi and the other generals who had a history of fighting against various countries and dealing with powerhouses from Haotian Taoism at night. Therefore, He could not understand why Su Qi would rather join forces with the Devil's Doctrine in the face of the pressure from the West Hill Divine Palace. He asked sternly, "Uncle, are you going to watch a devil from the Devil's Doctrine become the Empress Dowager of the Tang Empire?" Su Qi said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, you have been married to the Empress for nearly 20 years. You must have known that she came from the Devil's Doctrine. Since your Majesty has no objection, I have no objection either." Hua Shangyue suddenly felt exhausted. He did not expect that the dossier he brought out on behalf of Her Highness would not produce the results he had expected. He said in confusion, "Even if her son could rule the Tang Empire?" Su Qi was silent. Hua Shangyue suddenly thought of the words that Her Highness emphasized in the secret letter. He hurried to the desk and said angrily, "Even if His Majesty died young because he was poisoned by the Empress?" Su Qi suddenly raised his head. Hua Shangyue stared into his eyes and said, "Everything will be proved in the future. What Her Highness asked you to do is just a little slower. Whether the Tang Empire can last for thousands of years depends on your decision." In the Chang, an imperial palace, the current Tang Emperor, Li Huiyuan, looked at the gloomy sky, but his expression was not gloomy. He said with a smile, "My royal sister said that the rumors are not important. Those rebels' doubts about the edict are not important. It doesn't matter who supports me. What matters is the military power and the stability of Chang'an." He Mingqi held the yellow oiled paper umbrella and stood quietly beside him. After a moment of silence, he said, "Her Highness has been familiar with political affairs for many years. Her views on these matters are naturally worth relying on." Being worth relying on in one aspect did not mean being worth relying on in all aspects. If this sentence was further developed, if one had to rely on others for everything, then what was the use of one? Li Huiyuan was a very smart man. He understood what He Mingqi meant. His expression quickly became gloomy and he said coldly, "Don't try to sow discord between me and my royal sister. For the sake of your recent contributions, I will pretend that I didn't hear it today. But if there is a next time, you know what will happen." He Mingqi slightly frowned and said, "I understand. My royal sister sent Xian Zhilong to Tuyang City the year before last. Now the northeast border military belongs to me. Xu Cheng's foundation is shallow, and the Tang Empire's West Army is weak. If he is smart, he will not speak before the situation is clear." Li Huiyuan indifferently said, "According to the time, Hua Shangyue should be talking with Su Qi now. With that matter, the northern military camp will no longer support that woman." He Mingqi was very clear about what matter His Majesty was talking about. In fact, it was he who told Li Yu and her brother about the Empress's secret background. Now the only problem is Su Shi, who is retiring in the south. Li Huiyuan frowned and said. He Mingqi said, "This is also the most difficult problem." Li Huiyuan expressed his agreement with silence. He Mingqi said, "Su Shi is the Defender General of the state. He is very experienced and powerful. Even the Yulin Royal Guards have to listen to his orders. Besides, he is very prestigious and no one can touch him." Li Huiyuan looked at the gloomy sky above the palace and said with a gloomy face, "This old guy has been living for many years, but he still refuses to retire. If he is in the court, does the Tang Empire's army belong to me or him?" After a moment of silence, He Mingqi said, "Your Majesty, how do you want to persuade General Su Shi? I am willing to share your worries." Li Huiyuan said sarcastically, "Uncle Qingshan had to avoid Su Shi. Even if I make you the nation master now, what can you do to him? If the Southern Gate Temple had this ability, would it still be under the West Hill Divine Palace?" He Mingqi said, "Your Majesty is right. But I believe that under your Majesty's rule, the Southern Gate Temple will flourish in the future. It will surpass the West Hill Divine Palace and not bring shame to the Tang Empire. That is in the future after all." Li Huiyuan squinted and suddenly said, After all, you and the West Hill Divine Palace are of the same lineage. You have a close relationship. Do you have any way to contact the West Hill Divine Palace? He Mingshi was slightly surprised and said seriously, Your Majesty, I know that I am asking a tiger for its skin. I know what the old fakes of the West Hill Divine Palace want, and I can give them. I also know what I want, but I can't afford to lose. Li Huiyuan waved his hand and said gloomily, In order to resist foreign aggression, we must first stabilize the interior. When the Tang Empire was founded, Emperor Taizu was forced to sign an agreement with the desolate men. He was humiliated, but he finally drove the desolate men out of the grassland. They were like cattle and sheep in the cold region of the far north, where they suffered for thousands of years. In the future, I will lead the army to flatten the Peach Mountain. The headmaster of the academy and the Tang Emperor passed away one after another. At that time, it seemed that the Tangs accepted this reality calmly. Because the Tangs were used to life and death, their spirit and temperament had been running wildly on the road of toughness. But in fact, the hearts of the Tangs, especially the bigwigs of the Tang Empire, were changing subtly. Even they themselves did not notice that change. They were no longer as confident and direct as when the headmaster of the academy and His Majesty were still alive. They began to rely on schemes and even began to seek external forces. For the tens of thousands of Tang soldiers in Helan City, this influence was more reflected in their emotions. Especially after the military food supply was controlled, the atmosphere in the city became more and more gloomy. Before the rain stopped, we had already sent out 3 groups of messengers. After the rain stopped, we sent a few more groups. According to the time, it should be the day after tomorrow at the latest. Don't worry too much, Your Majesty. General Han Qing reported in a low voice. The Empress said expressionlessly, What if the messengers are all killed? Han Qing's face was livid. He wanted to speak, but he suppressed the urge to swear. His anger was naturally not directed at the Empress, but at some people in Chang'an City. That night, when Helan City tried to send messages again, they found that the talisman array in the Imperial Palace of Chang'an City had been shut down. The people in Helan City understood what had happened. Han Qing said in a low voice, We will set off for the south tomorrow. Rest assured, Your Majesty, no one will dare to stop us. The Empress said, No one dares to cut off the food supply of Helan City. Su Qi doesn't dare, and neither does Li Yu. The food team did not come, but it does not mean that there is something wrong with the northern military camp. The problem may be in the wilderness. Master Huang Yang, who had been silent, said, I will go around the east wilderness to return to Chang'an first. The Empress said tiredly, The headmaster has passed away, and His Majesty has left. Once there is a big movement, the whole world will move. I think the East Wilderness is not peaceful now. Li Yu is a very smart girl. She must have thought of this. She is very clear about what is happening in the East Wilderness, but she is confident that she can solve it. However, I am worried that she has underestimated the enemy. Han Qing frowned and said, Your Majesty, do you think it is possible that Her Highness has colluded with the Golden Tribe Royal Court to cut off the food supply of Helan City? The Empress shook her head and said, Li Yu may be a little narrow-minded, but she knows that she is a Tang and would not do such a thing. I think the Golden Tribe Royal Court's strange move is most likely a trick of the West Hill Divine Palace. But I believe she will be very happy to see this. Countless grassland cavalries appeared in the wilderness at the border of the Yen territory. The wilderness was very wet after being drenched by heavy rain for many days. No matter how strong the wind howled, there was no dust flying. However, at this time, the wilderness was covered in smoke and dust, rising to the sky. It could be imagined how many cavalries there were. Long Qing touched the silver mask on his face and looked at his homeland in the south of the Yen kingdom. In his eyes, there was no fear of homecoming, nor was there any emotion of returning from a long journey. There was no flame of hatred, only indifference. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 707. The cause of the war was that the desolate man had fought with the left king's palace for the grassland. Then it snowballed until all the countries in the world were involved. No one had expected that the left king's palace would gradually stay out of the war. They suffered the least losses in the war in the wilderness, and with the secret support of the West Hill Divine Palace, they had preserved enough strength. Tens of thousands of cavalrymen of the left king's palace entered the Yen territory in the name of fighting against the Tang Empire. But in many people's eyes, it was just a very poor excuse. Most people thought that Prince Longqing finally wanted to take the throne of the Yen kingdom after he completely controlled the left king's palace. He wanted to take back what he thought belonged to him. So what if they knew? The Yen kingdom was poor and weak under the attack of the Tang Empire. It could not deal with the fierce cavalrymen. In addition, Prince Longqing had many supporters in the Yen kingdom. All the counties ignored the anger of the capital. In order to preserve their own strength, they did not make any serious resistance. Therefore, tens of thousands of grassland cavalrymen easily went south. They did not encounter a real battle until they approached Qingjing City. The Yen army was no match for the grassland cavalrymen. They lost many battles. In addition, with the help of Prince Longqing's family and old generals, more than 10 cities in the north of Qingjing City surrendered one after another. With the mutiny of the north camp of Qingjing City, no one could stop Prince Longqing from returning to the capital. In the deep night, countless torches were lit on the wall of the capital of the Yen kingdom. The city walls were as bright as day. The security was extremely tight. No one knew that the south gate, which should have been closed, had been quietly opened. Dozens of soldiers kept waving their arms at the wilderness in the night. The sound of hooves gradually sounded in the night. The moon shone through the clouds, showing the dark scene of the grassland cavalrymen. It was extremely shocking. Qingjing City was conquered. The hooves of the grassland cavalrymen were wrapped in cotton. But after entering the south gate, they rode on the narrow street. There were too many cavalrymen, and the sound of hooves gradually became louder. It could not be hidden from everyone's ears. The doors of the houses on both sides of the street were tightly closed. Some bold Yen people secretly looked at the foreign cavalrymen through the cracks of the doors. They counted for a long time, but they did not see the cavalrymen leave. The people of Yen were shocked and terrified. It was not until then that they truly felt the authenticity of the rumors. It turned out that Prince Longqing had really become the master of the Left Palace. How many barbarians had entered the capital tonight? Could those rumored brutal barbarians obey the prince's military order and not burn, kill, and loot? The silver mask reflected the light from the torches, making it look like it was made of gold. Prince Longqing glanced at the palace in the distance. His face, which was not covered by the mask, showed no change of emotion. Then he took out a map and looked at the defensive measures and plans drawn on the map in silence. The grassland cavalrymen were able to march south smoothly and easily into capital Qing because of the power of his mother's family in the Yen kingdom and the pervasive penetration of his former subordinates into the court of the Yen kingdom. However, the map he was looking at now was not the one sent by his former subordinates in the defense of capital Qing. He had drawn it himself. In the spring, before he led the cavalrymen of the Left Palace to ambush the black horse carriage, he had already drawn the map and sent it back to capital Qing. The map in his hands now was the one he had drawn later according to his memory. Thinking of the day when they ambushed the black horse carriage, but were ambushed by the desolate men, Longqing frowned slightly. If not for the loss of so many grassland cavalrymen that day, he was confident that tonight would be more perfect. However, victory was right in front of him. After solving the problem of the Yen kingdom, he would lead the army to continue attacking the Tang Empire. Ning Kei's country would eventually be burned to ashes by him. What was there to be dissatisfied about? Long Qing looked at capital Qing shrouded in darkness and the complicated streets under the moonlight. He compared the plan he had drawn on the map with the corner of his mouth slightly curled up, as if he was smiling with satisfaction. However, there seemed to be a very complicated emotion on his face, as if he was waiting for someone and something to happen. In the northwest of capital Qing, there was an inconspicuous restaurant. Around the restaurant, there were nearly 100 Tang soldiers with padaos on their backs and dozens of messengers from the Tang and Yan armies. In the restaurant, Xian Zhilong rubbed his tired eyebrows and thought about the strategy he had drawn up. After confirming that there should be no problem, he said to a Yan general, "I hope the cooperation goes well." The Yan general said respectfully, "His Highness the Crown Prince is very grateful for Her Highness' help. However, Long Qing's rebellion is very powerful. His Highness asks you to take care of yourself. Long Qing is ambitious and capable. He also knows how to take advantage of the situation. When he was wanted by the West Hill Divine Palace, he was still able to make a name for himself in the wilderness." Xian Zhilong said. Now that he has returned to the West Hill Divine Palace and gained the support of Haotian Taoism, he is even more arrogant. However, he doesn't understand one thing. If he is invincible with the support of the Divine Hall, how can the Tang Empire survive until today? The Yan general said, "If His Highness the Crown Prince could feel your confidence, he would be even happier." Xian Zhilong was the great northern general of the Tang Empire. He was supposed to stay in Tuyang City and command the northeast border military, which was famous for its violence and power. Who would have thought that he would appear in the capital of the Yan Kingdom? Since he was here, his army was naturally in the capital of the Yan Kingdom. After the war in the wilderness, the Tang Empire's army retreated in two ways. The northeast border military retreated to Tuyang City on the surface. However, no one knew that the northeast border military had secretly sneaked into the Yan territory again and set up an ambush in capital Qing. The Yan Kingdom was so powerless against the grassland cavalry. They allowed them to go all the way to the south and watched them enter capital Qing. It was all because of this hidden killing in the dark. This was the gift that Crown Prince Chongming prepared for his brother, who had just returned from afar. This was also the fundamental reason why Li Yu was so confident, even though she knew that the situation in the eastern wilderness had changed. Xian Zhilong walked to the railing of the restaurant and looked to the south of the city. He looked at the sky that was getting brighter and brighter. He seemed to hear the hoofbeats of the grassland cavalry. Long Qing led the army to the south and was determined to win the throne of the Yan Kingdom. However, Chang'an City wanted Crown Prince Chongming to succeed the throne. Not to mention the friendship between Her Royal Highness and Crown Prince Chongming, it was impossible for Long Qing to change the situation of the Yan Kingdom so easily for the benefit of the Tang Empire. Xian Zhilong thought about the news from Chang'an and the Gushan commandery. His face gradually became solemn. He did not ambush all his troops in capital Qing. Tonight there were only more than 4,000 armored cavalries in the city, but they were already the most powerful and decisive force in Tuyang City. He did not think that the grassland cavalry, who only knew the art of archery, could fight against the invincible heavy cavalry of the Tang Empire on the flat street. However, he was still nervous. It had nothing to do with the Yan Kingdom. It was only about Chang'an. The new emperor had succeeded the throne, and the undercurrents were surging in Chang'an. There were hidden murderous intents around the country. Whether it was for the stability of the court or the safety of the Tang Empire, this battle had to be fought. This was the battle to determine the new Tang Empire. They had to win, and it had to be a complete victory. There was a prince's mansion in the northeast of capital Qing. The former owner of the mansion was Prince Long Qing. Although it had been abandoned for many years, the luxurious and exquisite remnants of the past could still be seen. Everyone knew the purpose of Prince Long Qing leading the army to the south. The safest palace had now become the most dangerous place, so Crown Prince Chongming had left the palace early. He came to the prince's mansion with his loyal subordinates and several generals. Then, he locked himself in the prince's study and stayed alone for a long time. Looking at the dusty books on the bookshelf, Crown Prince Chongming suddenly remembered the scene of him holding Long Qing and learning to read many years ago. A nostalgic smile appeared on his face. Then, he gradually calmed down and walked out of the study. The intelligence office is still calculating the number of barbarian cavalries entering the city. It has not been completely calculated, but compared with the number when they entered the city, there is a big gap. The barbarian cavalries have now arrived at the musical house and are not far from the palace. An official reported to him. Crown Prince Chongming said, "Is there any news from the restaurant?" A subordinate reported, "The Tang cavalry has not moved. They are waiting for the fireworks. It seems that the sacrifice at the beginning is inevitable." Crown Prince Chongming said, "Then light the fireworks and inform all the people in the city." Soon after he finished his words, a gorgeous firework rushed into the night sky toward the government office across the street. The firework flew so high that it seemed to touch the moon. It was believed that all the people in the city could see it. Crown Prince Chongming looked at the firework gradually disappearing in the moonlight. After a long silence, he suddenly said, "The black-armored cavalry of the Tang Empire is said to be invincible in the world. They have never been defeated?" The heavy-armored cavalry was the most terrifying combat force in the field. Even the powerful cultivators could not resist it. However, there was no perfect thing in the world. The heavy-armored cavalry also had its weaknesses. The armor was too heavy for long-distance attack. Moreover, it was affected by the armor. In narrow areas, it was not as flexible as the light cavalry. This was the most obvious weakness of the heavy-armored cavalry. The biggest problem was that the maintenance cost of the heavy-armored cavalry was very high. A heavy-armored cavalry needed a large number of retinue and auxiliary soldiers. The consumption was extremely terrifying. In today's world, except for the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace, no other country could organize a heavy-armored cavalry. However, there was a reason why the heavy-armored cavalry was called the important weapon on the battlefield. This kind of cavalry was given the mission to charge and charge from the day it was born. It was the nightmare of countless enemies. The streets of the capital of Yen Kingdom were long and straight. Logically speaking, it was not suitable for the heavy-armored cavalry to charge. However, with the cooperation of the Yen Kingdom's local army and the grassland light cavalry that followed Long Qing to the south, this kind of environment would allow the Tang heavy-armored cavalry to fully exert their charging power. Whether from the perspective of strategy or the specific tactical arrangement, Xian Zhilong was worthy of the title of a wise general. If there were no accidents, Prince Long Qing and his tens of thousands of grassland light cavalry would become a small record in the history books and a joke on the streets after tonight. The fireworks lit up the night sky. The Tang soldiers near the restaurant carried long padeos on their backs and looked up at the sky with a calm and confident expression. Xian Zhilong looked at the firework and ordered softly, "Attack." Long Qing also saw the firework. The corners of his lips curled up even higher, showing that he was very satisfied. Xian Zhilong is the most intelligent one among the 4 royal generals of the Tang Kingdom. He is used to calculating people's hearts with interest. However, he has forgotten the most important point. There are many kinds of interests, and the biggest interests are the so-called righteousness. Long Qing looked at the generals of the palace and said, "The curtain has opened. This is the world's first war against the Tang Kingdom. Haotian is watching us, so let's kill all these proud Tangs." After saying this, he lightly lifted the reins of his horse and rode into a quiet alley with more than 10 fallen generals. He was going to do the most important thing, and that was to cut off the Tang's path of retreat. The Yen Kingdom's palace looked particularly beautiful at night. Under the eaves were autumn trees all over the mountains. Under the moonlight it was cold and beautiful. It was like a fairyland. Looking at the beautiful scenery in the distance, and imagining the pleasure of rushing into the palace and kidnapping the palace maids, the grassland cavalry's eyes turned red. When the general gave the order, they could only hear the loud whistles. The cavalrymen unsheathed their cutlasses and brandished them. Then, they clamped their horses' bellies and charged forward. Hundreds of grassland cavalrymen rushed through the long street and then fell down one by one. More than 10 horse tripping ropes tore off many horses' legs like poisonous snakes. The Yen army, who had been lying in ambush on both sides of the long street for a long time, began to shoot arrows. The arrows fell like rain. In a moment, the cavalrymen died, screaming in pain. The battle did not end after it started. Almost at the same time, the entire Qingjing city was filled with the sounds of fighting and screams. Blood stained the night sky and broken limbs flew in the moonlight. It should be fine. There was not a single torch on the straight road to the side of the Yen Kingdom's imperial palace, and no sound could be heard. The moonlight that passed through the trees fell on the heavy armor of the Tang cavalry, making the armor of both men and horses shine coldly. This was the Tang Northeast Border Military's black armored cavalry vanguard camp. The general of the vanguard camp pulled down his helmet and slowly pulled out his straight saber. He pointed at the night sky and the long street and shouted in a deep voice, "Crush them!" The hooves of the horses gradually moved. The heavy armored cavalrymen stepped on the hard ground and began to charge again, just like in the past. The earth began to shake. The whole city began to shake. All the details of this fatal ambush against Long Qing and the grassland cavalrymen were carefully planned. The cooperation between the Tang army and the Yen army had been practiced many times, so they were very skilled. When the Tang armored cavalrymen rushed out of the straight road beside the imperial palace, the Yen army, who were struggling in the archway behind the straight road, made way for them at the fastest speed. The grassland cavalrymen of the left king's palace were waving their machetes and looking for the Yen army, who were still alive. Suddenly, they felt the earth shaking and were shocked to find that their horses became inexplicably uneasy. They looked to the north subconsciously and then saw the Tang cavalrymen and horses in black. The Tangs! Retreat! The Tang armored cavalrymen did not care about the grassland cavalrymen's exclamation. They maintained the perfect speed and continued to charge on the long street with terrifying momentum. Wherever they passed, the grass gradually fell. However, at this moment, something unexpected happened. There was a bug in the previous part. When the Tang emperor wrote the edict, only Li Qingshan was beside him. Huang Yang was not there. I want to explain it here. By the way, I was really saving the manuscript. Now I have saved a chapter. Damn it, I will update that chapter immediately. There will be 2 chapters today. I will try to save some manuscripts tonight. How painful. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 708. The decorated archway at the end of the street collapsed. Then, several neighboring commercial buildings collapsed one after another. Smoke and dust rose. Countless bricks and pieces of wood piled up into a small hill, blocking the way out of the long street. The grassland cavalry general's anxious and frightened expression became ferocious. He held his machete and looked at the charging Tang army, no longer retreating. The grassland cavalry did not retreat either. Suddenly, more tripping ropes appeared on the chaotic street, entangling the hooves of the Tang heavy cavalry. The Tang cavalry fell heavily on the ground. Their heavy armors collided with the hard ground, making a dull sound. Blood flowed out of their gray armors. More Yen soldiers appeared in the buildings on both sides of the street and started shooting arrows at the Tang army. The arrows suddenly rained down violently. Several arrows pierced through the edges of the Tang cavalry's armors at the same time. From time to time, buildings collapsed on the street, becoming insurmountable obstacles for the heavy cavalry. Some cavalrymen and their mounts were buried by the collapsed buildings and could not stand up again. This was indeed an ambush. But it was not an ambush by the Tang army and the Yen army against the grassland cavalry. It was an ambush by the Yen army and the grassland cavalry against the Tang army. The Tang black armored heavy cavalry was invincible in the world. Could they still be invincible today? The Tang general looked at his subordinates who kept falling down. His voice was as cold as the snow on Min Mountain. He looked at the Yen army and the grassland cavalry on both sides of the street and said, "Kill them all and we can get out." Ambushes took place everywhere in the city. The Tang army suffered a heavy blow, but they still charged forward fearlessly. With the anger of betrayal and the grief of the sacrifice of their comrades, they waved the padeos in their hands and stabbed the spears in their hands, continuing to charge forward. The Northeast Border Army Vanguard Battalion was facing the most difficult situation on the long street. They had the largest number of enemies, the grassland barbarians with terrible archery skills. It seemed that they could not kill them all. But there were no enemies in the world that could not be killed. All the Tang cavalrymen had a belief. As the general said, as long as they killed all the enemies in front of them, they would naturally be able to get out. Shrill cries and muffled collisions rang out on the long street. The grassland cavalry and the Yen army, which were like tidewater, were frightened by the Tang cavalry. A gap appeared on the wide area where the two streets intersected. The commander of the Vanguard Battalion transferred the padao that had already been chipped to his left hand and said in a deep voice, "Continue the charge." As long as they rushed out of the long street, the Yen kingdom would no longer be able to organize an effective blockade. Then, he could follow the great general's plan and lead his men back through the east gate. He did not turn his head. He knew that out of the 1,000 heavy cavalry under his command, only less than half remained. This was the worst defeat the great Tang black armored cavalry had suffered in the last few decades. But he was not sad, because he believed that every cavalry under his command had killed at least several times their number of enemies before they died. That was enough. This way, he could puff out his chest and go back proudly. The general of the Vanguard Battalion lifted the reins of his horse and galloped forward. With a slash of his saber, a grassland cavalryman was cut into two halves from the body to the blade. Then, he passed through the rain of blood and rushed forward. Suddenly, his injured right hand, which was holding the horse zombie, stiffened. The horse, which was already a little tired, stopped moving. The hundreds of Tang cavalrymen behind him also quieted down. The grassland cavalrymen had long been scared out of their wit. Their formation was in a mess and scattered on the side. However, the gap that seemed to allow the Tang cavalrymen to leave had been filled up by the cavalry. Those cavalrymen also wore black armor. But compared to the Tang cavalrymen, their armors were painted with complicated golden talisman lines, which were more eye-catching and bright in the night. In the world, there were only two kinds of cavalrymen qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as the Tang cavalrymen. One was the elite cavalryman directly under the Golden Palace. The other was the papal cavalryman of the West Hill Divine Palace. It was even said that the papal cavalrymen of the Divine Hall could not defeat 1,000 of them. For countless years, the number of papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace was strictly limited to 1,000, probably to avoid disturbing the secular imperial power. But now it seemed that this was obviously a lie made by the West Hill Divine Palace. Because there were more than 1,000 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace on the opposite side of the long street. The general of the Vanguard Battalion squinted and lifted his helmet to look across the long street. He wiped the blood off his face and was silent for a long time. Then he suddenly laughed. "I have wanted to prove one thing in my life. You West Hill cavalrymen are only qualified to carry my boot. I did not expect that I would have such an opportunity before I die." The general of the Vanguard Battalion stopped laughing and slowly raised his padao. He said, "Who is willing to fight with me?" The hundreds of Tang cavalrymen behind him answered in unison. They were not afraid, but were ready to fight to the death. In the restaurant, Xian Zhilong looked at the city in the night. He held the cold railing tightly, his knuckles turning white. He squinted and was silent for a moment. Then he loosened his right hand and tapped on the railing. When he tapped on his ring finger, he stopped. Then he issued 3 military orders. Vanguard Battalion, disperse. The order forbidding entry is abolished. Kill at will. We must hold on until dawn. All battalions are to break through the East City Gate in an hour. The route and tactics are the opposite of the pre-war arrangement. Imperial Guard Battalion, follow me to the prince's mansion. The officers and messengers in the restaurant were stunned for a moment. Then they began to act separately. With the quality of the Tang army, there should not be such a moment of stagnation. But even they needed time to digest the content of Xian Zhilong's 3 military orders. Dispersing the vanguard battalion was tantamount to sending them to their deaths to buy time for the other cavalry battalions to escape. We have lost. Xian Zhilong looked at the crowd and said, "Then we must lose beautifully. If there are any of you alive after this battle, remember to bring a message to Her Highness. We lost because of trust. Now the whole world is against the Tang Empire. Then the Tang Empire can only trust the Tang Empire." After saying this, he glanced at the Yen general. The Yen general was one of the most important generals of the Yen kingdom. Otherwise, he would not be qualified to be here. The Yen general smiled sadly and pulled out his knife to commit suicide. Xian Zhilong walked out of the restaurant. Dozens of Tang soldiers with padeos walked out of the darkness. They looked around vigilantly. They knew that since they were ambushed, the general must be the first person the enemy wanted to kill. But Xian Zhilong did not want to wait to be killed by the Yans. His 3rd military order had already made his choice clear. He would lead the Imperial Guard Battalion to the prince's mansion in the east. He was going to see Crown Prince Chongming. Or kill him or be killed by him. There are still 3 days until the monthly votes are doubled. Maybe we will win or maybe we will lose. That's all. I will try my best. Invincible? See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 709. Li Yu trusted Crown Prince Chongming, who had known her for many years. That was why she betrayed and killed in the capital of the Yen kingdom tonight. Xian Zhilong trusted Li Yu, but he was an intelligent imperial general. He did not forget to make his own arrangements while cooperating with the Yen kingdom according to Li Yu's request. To be on the safe side, he arranged an escape route for the thousands of Tang armored cavalrymen who had sneaked into the capital. That escape route was the most inconspicuous East City Gate. The military order was passed from the restaurant to all parts of the capital through fireworks and death knights. The Tang cavalrymen fought bravely towards the East City Gate and gradually gathered. If the Tang cavalrymen were allowed to gather and rush out of the gate into the wilderness, then the death zone would become a survival zone. It would be very difficult to wipe out the thousands of cavalrymen. Chongming and Long Qing had such a good opportunity after years of forbearance and disguise. How could they allow such a thing to happen? So they closed the city gates at the beginning of the battle. The Yen people were very cruel. The city gates were not closed like usual. Instead, they were sealed with heavy iron gates and 10,000 kilogram stones. In this way, when they reopened the gates after the battle, they would have to use a lot of labor. Even if the Tang army reached the city gates, they would not be able to get out. The only variable was the East City Gate. This was the survival route that Xian Zhilong had left for the Tang army. Naturally, he had made arrangements here. Several military powerhouses with more than 100 Tang soldiers had already taken control of this place. The heavy iron gate was suspended in midair, and the 10,000 kilogram stone was only a few feet away from rolling down the tunnel. The ground outside the city gate was covered in blood, and the corpses of the Yen Kingdom soldiers were lying in a pool of blood. It could be imagined how dangerous and bloody the previous battle was. The Tang army stood on the waist of the city wall and looked at the city in the night. They listened to the shouting and the sound of buildings collapsing in the distance. Their faces were full of anxiety. At this time, the Yen army in the city was attracted by the powerful Tang cavalrymen. Even if someone noticed the movement at the East City Gate, there was no way to mobilize a strong enough army. But they could not hold on forever. They only hoped to see their comrades as soon as possible. The sound of hooves gradually rose. The faces of the Tang army were filled with surprise. However, moments later, the surprise on their faces turned into anger and disappointment. Many people wearing black priest robes arrived at the East City Gate. The person at the front was wearing a silver mask. It was Prince Long Qing and his fallen commander. Black peach blossoms bloomed. An expert of the Tang army punched the black peach blossom with a thunderous punch. The black peach blossom petals trembled slightly. Another expert of the Tang army jumped down from the city wall. Several powerhouses of the Tang army attacked Long Qing together with tacit understanding. In their eyes, the fallen commanders did not exist at all. There was only the silver-masked man. The aura of heaven and earth suddenly became turbulent and uneasy. The thick skin of the city wall peeled off. The ancient bricks began to tremble. After an unknown amount of time, there was a loud bang. The 10,000 caddy stone fell. The iron gate fell heavily to the ground. "We've lost the East Gate." One of the subordinates looked at the warning firework rising from the east, and his face turned ashen. Xian Zhilong stopped, but the expression on his face remained calm. After a moment of silence he said, "Since we can't leave, then we won't. Tell all the battalion generals that the Vanguard Battalion is now facing the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. Tell them that if they don't want to miss such an interesting thing, then they should all go to the archway of the West Hill Divine Palace. Then they can go to the Imperial Palace. Tell them that the goal of the war has changed. Now we only have two goals. The first is to kill all the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. The second is to burn down the Imperial Palace of the Yen Kingdom and kill the Yen Emperor." After a moment of silence, Xian Zhilong said, "If we can achieve these two goals, then even if we die here like idiots, we will have an explanation to the elders of the Tang Empire." Throughout the night, the whole of Qingjing was shaking. The iron gate at the East City Gate was also shaking. From time to time, there was a dull sound of impact and the sound of punches, kicks and knives. After a long time, there was no more sound. The sky was getting brighter. Qingjing became much quieter during the day. Only the sound of chasing and fighting could be heard occasionally. The government began to organize civilian workers and government runners to clean up the street. At noon, the iron gate at the East City Gate was finally pulled up. There were dead bodies everywhere in front of the iron gate. Some of them were from the Tang Empire, some were from the Yen Empire, and some were dressed in strange black robes. As the iron gate was pulled up, the blood that had not completely coagulated flowed out like a stream. Looking at this tragic scene, the civilian workers and soldiers of the Yen Empire were extremely pale. Especially when they saw the deep palm prints and knife marks on the iron gate, they were even more frightened. They secretly wondered if the Tang army was human. How could they have such a terrible determination in such a desperate situation? The Yen Empire and the Tang Empire had been enemies for many years, but they had never won on the battlefield. They had always been humiliated and bullied. The battle last night was undoubtedly the biggest victory that the Yen Empire had ever won against the Tang Empire. It was worthy of being written in a book to express the grievances of the Yen people over the years. In the face of such a victory, the whole country should be celebrating. However, there was no such atmosphere in Qingjing at this time. The people who won were not happy at all. People were cleaning up the broken bodies on the street in fear and disgust. They used brooms to sweep the scattered organs. No one knew how many Yen soldiers and grassland cavalrymen had been trampled into meat paste by the Tang cavalry. There were still sporadic fights in some streets, but no Yen people dared to go near. Only the Yen soldiers and grassland barbarians held weapons and searched around in fear. In the corner of the street, a young Yen soldier found a Tang cavalryman who was not completely dead. He kept slashing with his knife, looking extremely numb and mechanical. The Tang soldier was long dead. At this time, he had been slashed so many times, but he did not feel much pain. He looked up indifferently at the young Yen soldier, his eyes full of sarcasm. He spat at the Yen soldier. There were countless holes in his chest, and he was about to stop breathing. The spittle was bloody and could not reach far. It fell on his own chest and then he died. The young Yen soldier was startled. He threw away his knife and ran away crying. In the northeast of Qingjing, outside the old prince's mansion of Prince Long Qing, hundreds of Yen soldiers and grassland cavalrymen surrounded the place. In front of the prince's mansion, there were many corpses of Tang soldiers. Most of them were covered with arrows. A few Tang soldiers had attacked the stone steps, but they could not go any further. There were also a few Tang soldiers standing on the street, surrounded by the heavy siege. They protected Xian Zhilong in the middle. Xian Zhilong was covered in blood, but his face was expressionless. After a while, a few more Tang soldiers fell to the ground. Now only Xian Zhilong and the general of the Imperial Guard camp were left. The general looked around at the approaching enemies and suddenly asked, "General, if we die now, will it be a disgrace to the Tang Empire?" Xian Zhilong said, "All the fault is His Highness and me. It has nothing to do with you." The general said, "That's good. Please send me off, General." Xian Zhilong laughed and coughed. He said, "Not you." The general said seriously, "According to the military law of the Tang Empire, I must die before you." Xian Zhilong stopped smiling and drew out his sword. He said, "You know my swordsmanship is terrible. Please forgive me." The general said, "General, we have been disrespectful since you came to Tuyang City. Please forgive us." Xian Zhilong nodded and chopped down with his sword. Then he looked in the direction of the palace of the Yen kingdom with a look of regret. The front door of the prince's mansion opened and Crown Prince Chongming walked out. The army gradually separated and Prince Long Qing walked in from the periphery. The two looked at Xian Zhilong, who was standing with his sword. They had successfully schemed against the Tang general, who was known for his intelligence, and finally won. But they did not feel much joy. Looking at the weak general, Long Qing even felt a little cold. In the battle last night, he had suffered a serious knife wound on his shoulder. The power of the Tang Empire's cavalry was too terrifying. The violent and unreasonable counterattack at the end had almost rudely destroyed his whole plan. At the end of the battle, when the Tang army had lost, Xian Zhilong organized a beheading in a very short time. If he had not been protected by two martial arts powerhouses from the West Hill Divine Palace, he would have died in that assassination. The situation would have changed. Xian Zhilong looked at Crown Prince Chongming and asked, "How does it feel to be a traitor?" Crown Prince Chongming was still graceful and said, "Everyone has the right to say that I'm a traitor, but you Tangs don't. For countless years, the Yen kingdom has been bullied. During the reign of Marquis Xia, the Yen kingdom suffered even more. I don't know how many innocent people died under the Tang cavalry. If I join hands with you, it will be a real betrayal." Long Qing walked to Crown Prince Chongming and asked Xian Zhilong, "The Tang army's bravery is indeed extraordinary. What I don't understand now is why you haven't killed yourself." Xian Zhilong said, "I just want to ask a few questions." "What questions?" "The same question as before. I don't understand why Crown Prince Chongming would join hands with you to set up such a trap. I believe Her Highness in Chang and will also not understand when she knows the truth. You Tangs always like to flaunt the great harmony of the world. You think that you can really ignore the country after accepting foreigners to be officials in the court and teach in the academy. In fact, you have such a mentality because you have been strong enough in the past years. You have no idea what other people are thinking." Crown Prince Chongming said, "I have been a hostage in Chang'an for so many years. I have a good relationship with Sister Liu, and some Tang officials even advised me to stay in Chang'an to be an official. But have you ever thought about what the years in Chang'an mean to me? Have you ever thought that I am a yen after all? Xian Zhilong said after a moment of silence. The reason why I believe in Her Highness' plan and am willing to trust you is that I know very well that you and Prince Longqing can't coexist. Whether it is for the throne of the Yen Kingdom or for survival, you should want him to die. Crown Prince Chongming said, everything is just an illusion. We two brothers actually had a good relationship when we were young. Later on, when our mothers' families confronted each other, it had nothing to do with us, because we knew very well what each other wanted since we were young. I want the throne of the secular world, but he has his eyes on the secular world. And the only thing that we brothers really want is to destroy your Tang Empire. Xian Zhilong shook his head and said, desire is endless. Even if you have your eyes on the secular world, you are not willing to abandon the prosperity of the secular world. Otherwise, why would the West Hill Divine Palace do such things in the human world? And there is already a blood feud between your clansmen, which cannot be forgiven. One day you will regret today's decision. Longqing had been silent until now, and then he said, you are indeed a wise general of the Tang Empire, known for your wisdom. Even when you are about to die, you still do not forget to leave a nail in our hearts. Crown Prince Chongming said, even if there is a day when we fight, I will not regret today's choice. You Tangs have never been defeated for thousands of years. You don't know how crazy that feeling of humiliation is. For hundreds of years, you have humiliated us, and today, it will become the power to destroy you. For this purpose, whether it is me or Longqing, we are willing to give everything. Destroy the Tang Empire? Xian Zhilong laughed and looked at the Yen brothers. He said with emotion, after all, you have overestimated yourselves. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace are all dead. I believe that the strength that you have accumulated for many years has all been used in this battle. In the end, you can only die with us. Crown Prince Chongming's face became a little gloomy. He knew that Xian Zhilong's judgment was right. In order to annihilate all the cavalrymen of the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, the Yen Kingdom had paid a heavy price. After the battle last night, although the thousands of terrifying black armored cavalrymen of the Tang Empire could no longer appear in the world, the casualties of the Yen army and the grassland cavalrymen were almost 10 times that of the enemy. What was more shocking was that the more than 1,000 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace, which he and Longqing relied on to win the battle, were all annihilated by the exhausted Tang cavalrymen in the final battle. Could such a painful victory really be called a victory? I know what you want to say. You want to say that there are still many soldiers of the northeast border military who have not entered capital Cheng. But I regret to tell you that I did not bring all the grassland cavalrymen into capital Cheng. Now, those grassland cavalrymen are working together with the allied forces of the Song and Qin kingdoms to kill your troops. And by now, you should have judged that the number of papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace is definitely more than 1,000. Yes, the total number of papal cavalrymen has exceeded 10,000 as early as 5 years ago. Now that the people of the Yen Kingdom are united and we have such strong support, why can't we destroy the Tang Empire? Prince Longqing looked at Xian Zhilong and said, for thousands of years, you Tangs have bullied the weak and enjoyed all the glory because of your strong army. Have you ever thought that there would be a day when you would be defeated so badly? Everyone will die one day. No matter how strong an empire is, it will be destroyed one day. I don't know when the history of the Tang Empire will end, but it will not be now, and it will not be ended by the Yen Kingdom. Xian Zhilong said, the world calls the Tang army an invincible army. In fact, this is wrong. The Tang army will also suffer defeat. Even when we fight with the Yen Kingdom, we will lose sometimes. We are never as invincible as the rumors say, but we will always win in the end. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 710. There were many people like Xian Zhilong who believed that the Tang Empire would win in the end. Some had died in the battle last night. Some were still fighting. One of the Tang generals chopped off the neck of a Yin guard. He was the commander of the Northeast Border Military Vanguard Battalion of the Tang Empire. His name was Xing Yongli. His name was very auspicious, especially for a general. No matter if it was the former emperor or great general Xiahou, they all liked to see his name on the battle reports. Thus, his name appeared more and more frequently on the battle reports. He firmly controlled the strongest heavy cavalry in the Northeast Border Army. Of course, even if he was the illegitimate son of the emperor, he could not have risen to such an important position in the army with just his name. Xing Yongli was good at fighting and winning. That was the key. He had killed many enemies on the battlefield in his life, including the Yen Kingdom, the Song Kingdom, the barbarians of the Left King's Palace, and the desolate man returning to the south. But thinking about it now, he realized that the number of enemies he had killed last night was not even as many as he had killed last night. The archway collapsed and the vanguard battalion was ambushed. He rushed forward with his spear and changed his blade when his spear was broken. His right arm was hammered and his shoulder armor was deformed, so he changed his padao to his left hand. The padao had collided with the bones of the grassland cavalry and the Yen army, and there were many cracks on it. Then he saw the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. He led his subordinates and continued to charge forward, continuing to kill. He did not remember how many enemies he had killed. He only remembered that the proud papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace were left with fear and despair. He only remembered that all the enemies who dared to stand in front of the vanguard battalion had become corpses. The killing lasted until daybreak. He had also killed his way from the archway to the palace. This memory was very bloody, but it made him feel very happy. Blood kept flowing from the wound on his head and spread to his eyes. Xing Yongli's vision had become blood-red. The Yen Imperial Palace was full of autumn trees. It was no longer beautiful, only bloody. He was very tired. But thinking that the general's order had not been completed, he dragged his injured right leg and used the padao to support his heavy body and continued to walk into the palace. Xing Yongli did not look back. He knew that his subordinates who had followed him into the palace had all died. Because he did not hear any footsteps behind him, Xing Yongli didn't care. He continued forward. Suddenly, a few flashes of light appeared in Bloody's vision. It should be other soldiers of the Tang Empire who had broken into the imperial palace and wanted to take advantage of the chaos to set the palace on fire. Unfortunately, after a series of battles, there were too few comrades who could break into the imperial palace. The fire was quickly put out by the palace guards and eunuchs. Xing Yongli shook his head regretfully. Then, he saw a scarlet palace gate. He had no idea where he was. He tucked half of the padao under his armpit and pushed the heavy palace door open. Behind the door was a side hall. There were many panic-stricken palace maids and eunuchs in front and behind the side hall. Seeing the Tang soldiers covered in blood, the palace maids and eunuchs screamed. The screams of the eunuchs were even more shrill and miserable than those of the palace maids. Xing Yongli was taken aback and put the padao back into his hand. Seeing an old man in bright yellow clothes behind the eunuch and palace maid, he subconsciously felt that he was seeing things and rubbed his eyes. When his fingers left his eyes, they were covered in blood. Some brave eunuchs screamed and picked up a wooden stick to hit him. Xing Yongli wanted to swing his padao, but he found that all his strength seemed to have been used up the moment he pushed open the palace gate. He could not lift his arm. With a dull thud, the wooden stick in the eunuch's hand hit him hard on the forehead. There were already 2 deep wounds on his forehead, and a lot of blood flowed from them. Therefore, even with the addition of the rod, it didn't seem to change much. However, the strength of the rod caused his vision to turn dark, and he almost fell. Xing Yongli was about to fall, but he stared at the old man in bright yellow clothes on the stone steps, and refused to fall. He stared at the old man. The only old man who could wear bright yellow clothes in the Yen Kingdom's imperial palace could be the Yen Emperor. After a whole night of fighting, he finally broke into the imperial palace and found the Yen Emperor. He was about to complete the order given by the general, but he had no strength and was about to die. Xing Yongli was very unwilling. He was very unwilling. The Yen Emperor had been seriously ill for many years and could die at any time. He was kept alive by the imperial doctors and precious medicines sent by Chang'an City. Now that the emperor was dead, why was this old man still alive? Xing Yongli roared angrily. Then he used all his strength to throw the half of the padao in his hand at the old man in the distance. With the injuries on his body, he should have died long ago. The reason why he did not die was because he had been holding his breath. There was not much strength left in his body. The padao broke through the air and flew crookedly. It did not touch the Yen Emperor's body and fell down. It bounced a few times on the ground and almost hit the Yen Emperor's toes. The Yen Emperor had been seriously ill for many years and was besieged by the Tang army. He was so shocked that he could not think clearly. Seeing the Tang army throw a flying knife at him like a blood demon, he did not even see where the knife landed. He only heard a crisp sound and was so scared that his face turned pale and his lips turned black. He clutched his chest and collapsed into the eunuch's arms. "You scared the hell out of me!" The Yen Emperor screamed and stomped on the ground. Then he closed his eyes and stopped breathing. Screams and cries rang out in the side hall. The eunuchs and palace maids fled in all directions. No one cared about the Yen Emperor's body. In a panic, a palace maid overturned an oil lamp and the gauze curtain suddenly ignited. Xing Yongli looked at the scene in front of him, and it took him a while to understand what had happened. He muttered to himself, he was scared to death? You call this the emperor? After saying this and completing the military order given by Xian Zhilong, he finally felt tired and pain. He slowly sat on the ground and closed his eyes with a satisfied smile. Xing Yongli, the commander of the Tang Northeast Border Military Camp, had won the last victory of his military career. The news of the Yen Emperor's death quickly spread from the palace to the prince's mansion. Looking at the billowing black smoke in the direction of the palace, Xian Zhilong was quiet for a long time. Then he laughed out loud. His laughter seemed especially presumptuous and happy. "Even if it was an ambush, even if Her Highness and I fell into your trap, you still have to exchange the Emperor's life and the palace for destroying the Northeast Border Military." Crown Prince Chongming's face was livid. Long Qing was silent. Xian Zhilong looked at the two quietly. His eyes were unusually cold. He said, "This is not enough. I can tell you now that in the future, capital Qing will be massacred by the Tang army." Long Qing said, "There will be no Tang Empire in the world, and naturally there will be no Tang army. Her Highness and I are indeed the sinners of the Tang Empire. But do you really think that the Battle of Capital Qing can decide everything? Destroy the Tang Empire? Just you?" Xian Zhilong looked at the crowd and said sarcastically. Then he pulled back his sword and committed suicide. For the final victory, there are still 2 days before the double monthly votes. Well, let's update more tomorrow and the day after. Don't wait until the double to fight. Fight every day. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 711. I discovered a particularly scary problem. After I changed the input method, it automatically recognized something. Then I didn't pay attention to it. As a result, during this period of time, all the versions of myself have been typed into myself. I replaced them in the manuscript and found more than 500 places. I really can't change them in the VIP chapter. I'm ashamed, please ignore them. The next chapter will be right away. Crown Prince Chongming's face was very pale. His hands were slightly trembling in his sleeves. He looked at the half-ruined and half-scorched palace and wanted to say something, but he could not say anything. This ambush was carried out completely according to his and Long Qing's plans and arrangements. Before the ambush, they had expected that the desperate Tang army would inevitably launch a desperate counterattack. However, no matter how they thought about it, no one could have imagined that the Tang army's counterattack would be so terrifying and the Yen kingdom would pay such a heavy price. Father passed away, the palace was burned, and the elite combat power that had been accumulated for years was almost used up in this war. In the end, they only got the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, which was 1/6 of the enemy's strength. Was it really worth it? I didn't lie to Xian Zhilong. Half of the cavalry of the left king's palace are now in the eastern states and counties, preparing to kill the remaining Tang army. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace are indeed more than 10,000. Long Qing said after a moment of silence, I admit that I still underestimated the combat power of the Tang army. If the commander of this heavy cavalry was not Xian Zhilong, but the original Xiahou, perhaps we would have been prisoners now. But I still believe that the Tang Empire will perish. What we have done is worth it. Crown Prince Chongming looked at him and said, Why are you so confident? Long Qing said, Because this is not just a matter of the Yen kingdom, but a matter of the world. Haotian wants the Tang Empire to perish. Who can stop it? Xian Zhilong left most of the troops except for the heavy cavalry on the way back to the east. Correspondingly, Prince Long Qing had also put a lot of effort into this area. In addition to his grassland cavalry, the allied forces of the Song and Qi kingdoms, the prefectural armies of the Yen kingdom, and more importantly, more than 1,000 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace joined the war. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace and the grassland cavalrymen joined forces and successfully split up the northeast border military of the Tang Empire. The Tang army did not have the protection of the heavy cavalry, so they decided to break up and cross the blockade line to return to the Tang Empire. If this was an ordinary battlefield, the response of the current generals of the Tang army would not be too much of a problem. The problem was that this was not an ordinary battlefield, but the land of the Yen kingdom. The feud between Tang and Yen was extremely deep. The land in the northeast of the Tang Empire was forcibly taken from the Yen Empire many years ago. Between the two countries, wars would break out every once in a while. In recent years, General Xiahou had been in charge of Tuyang City, and his actions had become increasingly ruthless and cruel. The northeast border military's massacre in the Yen territory was too bloody. In the eyes of the Yen people, the Tangs were all evil invaders. In the eyes of the people of the East Yen, every Tangs were demons that should be sent to the underworld. Thus, the chase turned into a tragic civil war. All the people of the East Yen were mobilized. Even though they knew that the most likely outcome of encountering the Tang army was death, there were still many young men who went into the mountains and fields with sticks and farming tools to look for traces of the Tang army. They reported it to the government as soon as possible and then passed it on to the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace and the Grassland Cavalry. Tens of thousands of the Tang army, after being separated and surrounded, scattered themselves and then were surrounded again. Gradually, they formed countless small teams and struggled through the mountains and forests of the East Yen toward the Tang territory. Some of the Tang soldiers fell into the traps set by the hunters of the Yen kingdom and were coldly abandoned. Some Tang soldiers were found looking for food by the strong men of the village and were beaten to death by hundreds of people with sticks. On a peak somewhere in Kunshan County, several Tang soldiers looked at the people of the Yen kingdom who were gradually searching toward the peak. Their expressions gradually changed from anger and confusion to calmness, and then they began to tidy up their equipment. A Yen man shouted angrily at them from dozens of feet away, "When you killed the women and children of the Yen kingdom, Did you ever think that the Tang people would also be like stray dogs today? An arrow flew over and accurately hit the throat of the Yen man. A Tang soldier put away his bow expressionlessly and said coldly, "When two countries are at war, it is either you kill me or I kill you. I have killed 17 Yen soldiers in my life. How can you get back at me?" The people of the Yen kingdom who surrounded the mountain were in an uproar and then became even more angry and hateful. A white-haired old man shouted sternly, "Don't be afraid, everyone. They have limited arrows. The Song family village killed 3 Tang cavalrymen last night. How can we, the hundreds of men of the Chen family village, not be able to deal with these Tang thieves without horses?" The Tang soldier who shot the arrow was a low-ranking officer of this small team. The rest of the team had died on the road to the west, and now only the 4 of them were left. He looked at the excited Yen people who were approaching with farm tools in their hand. He frowned slightly and began to shoot arrows with his subordinate. After shooting the arrows, he pulled out his knife. When he was exhausted, he looked at the Yen people and said, "Idiots." Then he led his subordinates and rushed off the cliff to their death. In the Battle of Capital Qing, the most elite black-armored cavalry of the Tang Northeast Border Military was destroyed. This was the first time in many people's memory that the Tang Empire had suffered such a heavy loss. It was also the first time that the invincible black-armored cavalry of the Tang Empire was destroyed on a large scale. The whole world was shocked. The death of the Yen Emperor and the burning of the Yen Palace, which should have been more shocking, were completely forgotten. In the eyes of the people, it was worth it to destroy the black-armored cavalry of the Tang Empire. The news spread to the West Hill Divine Palace as fast as possible. The solemn black Divine Hall of Judgment reverberated with a very strange and depressing atmosphere. The red-robed priests and the black-robed deacons of the judicial department knelt on the ground and did not dare to breathe. The destruction of the Tang army was, of course, excellent news for the West Hill Divine Palace. Prince Long Qing, who had returned to Taoism, had made such a great contribution to the West Hill Divine Palace, which made many people in the judicial department excited. However, the current owner of the Divine Hall of Judgment was Yi Hongyu. People in the Divine Hall of Judgment did not know what the great Divine Priest of Judgment would think about this matter, especially about the great contribution made by Prince Long Qing. Yi Hongyu sat on the seat of heavenly black jade, like a pearl inlaid in an ink stone. The blood-red divine robe of judgment on her body was like a red cloth wrapped around the pearl. She really did not expect that Long Qing would do such a big thing. She also did not expect that she did not receive any news from the beginning to the end of the battle in capital Qing. This meant that there were still loopholes in her control of the judicial department, and the hierarch lord still did not trust her. At this moment, she recalled that 2 years ago, she accepted Ning Kei's request and went thousands of miles north to kill Long Qing. At that time, Crown Prince Chongming was the commander of the Yen Kingdom's military, but he did not respond in time, which made her very unhappy. Now that she thought about it, it was natural that the 2 brothers had put on such a good show in front of the world. Looking at the red-robed priests and black-robed deacons kneeling in the hall, Yi Hongyu slightly raised the corner of her mouth. She knew what these people were thinking, and also knew that they were afraid of her anger. But why would they be angry? Yi Hongyu stood up from the seat of heavenly black jade, looked at the crowd and said, "Get ready, everyone. It seems that it will not be long before the cavalry of the Divine Hall will appear in the Tang Kingdom." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 712. The battle in capital Qing shocked the world. Of course, the Tang Empire was the most shocked. The atmosphere in the court was particularly tense. The Queen's faction, which had been silent for a few days, straightened their bodies and stared at the bead curtain behind the throne. Her Highness, Princess Liu, was behind the bead curtain. The ministers did not hide the anger in their eyes. The northeast border military of the Tang Empire had been wiped out. Nothing like this had happened for many years. How could the proud Tangs bear it? Now the streets and alleys of Chang'an were full of discussions about this and accusations against the new emperor and the princess regent. Xian Zhilong was pushed to the position of the great general of the north by Her Highness. His decision to join forces with the Yan army was also Her Highness's plan. Now that they had suffered such a crushing defeat, who would be responsible if not Her Highness? The Tang Emperor, Li Huiyuan, looked at the ministers' faces and eyes. He was so angry that he almost broke the armrest of the throne. He wanted to send the Yulin royal guards to kick them out. But thinking of his sister's words, he suppressed his anger and looked at Emohan, the Grand Secretary of the Hall of Wenhua. The Yan Imperial Palace was burned and the Yan Emperor was killed. I don't want to argue for General Xian Zhilong and the soldiers of the northeast border military. I just want to say that they did not embarrass the Tang Empire. Emohan said with a gloomy face, "If any minister wants to criticize the soldiers who died for the country, please forgive me for cursing his relatives on the spot." This sentence was vulgar, but it was actually very shrewd. Even if the ministers of the Queen secretly scolded Xian Zhilong and the generals of the northeast border military, no one dared to say anything in the court. Heroes could not be insulted. Those soldiers had died for the country, but there were still people alive who needed to be responsible. The minister of the Ministry of Rights stepped out and bowed to the bead curtain. He said calmly and directly, "I think that the responsibility for the battle in capital Qing lies with Your Highness. What do you think?" The court was silent. Everyone knew that the Queen's faction would not let go of this opportunity. But not many people, including the officials of the Queen's faction, could think that the minister of the Ministry of Rights would directly say this and not give the Emperor and the Princess any chance. After a while, Li Yu's voice came from behind the bead curtain. "All responsibility lies with me. Once the war is over, I will pay with my life. But before that, milords should clearly consider what the most pressing matter for my great Tang is." The atmosphere in Chang'an was very depressing because of the defeat at the front line, especially because it was a crushing defeat that many Tangs had never seen in their lives. Although there was no gloom, when the Tangs discussed this matter, they were mostly angry. Anyway, not many people were in the mood to drink and have fun. But the building of Pines and Cranes was still brightly lit today, because a rich guest had booked the entire restaurant several days ago. After the court session was over, the guests gradually arrived and the liveliness began to return. Qingjing has suffered a crushing defeat, and the soldiers of the northeast border military are fighting for their lives in foreign countries. But you and I are meeting in a restaurant. Although a righteous heart is not afraid of right and wrong, and good wine can nourish the soul of heroes, beautiful women are out of the question. Master Xingjing still refuses to come? At this critical juncture, how can he be at ease in the residence, planting flowers and weeding weeds? Everyone has their own ambitions. Don't force him. Tonight in the building of Pines and Cranes was a gathering of the officials of the Empress faction. They probably thought that there was nothing to hide, so they did not try to hide it. The minister of the Ministry of Rights looked at the people at the banquet and frowned slightly. He said, "The main issue of today's gathering is the eastern border. Do you have any opinions on what Her Highness said in the court session?" An official sneered and said, "Pay with my life? How is this different from the vows of a shrew in the marketplace? Her Highness has stayed with the barbarians in the wilderness for a long time. How did she learn this trick?" The minister of the Ministry of Rights rebuked, "What nonsense are you talking about? Shut up." The official apologized, but he still did not let it go. He said, "I would like to ask you, in the history of the Tang Empire, is there a precedent of an emperor or a governor paying with his life because of a defeat at the front line? Since there is no such precedent, what does Her Highness mean? In order to shut the mouths of the people? After the war is over, are we really going to interrogate her and ask her to die? This is preposterous to the extreme." The Taichung Temple Chancellor stroked his beard and said after a moment of thought, but Her Highness's actions can at least dispel the grievances of the soldiers. Now that the country is in a crisis, His Majesty and Her Highness's next measures are appropriate. It is safe to move the troops of the Gutian Commandery and the northern military camp to the east. The previous official sneered and said, "It is just a way to cure the headache and cure the foot. Who doesn't know how to be a tinker? If you ask me, the eastern border is empty, and we can also use the southern expedition army. Her Highness has decided to use the 3 states of the Gutian Commandery. Everyone knows that she wants Hua Shangyue to defeat the Yan army and win back some face for her." The minister of the Ministry of Rights heard this and frowned even more. He said, "The Southern Expedition Army is far away at the edge of the forest, separated from Qinghe Commandery by mountains. They can only go around the Shannon Road, which is a long journey. By the time the Southern Expedition Army goes to the eastern border and fills the gap left by the northeast border military, the Yan army will have already fought their way to Chang'an." The official was startled and did not say anything more. Lord Li said something earlier, and I think that's the main point. Now that the country is in a crisis, all disputes should be settled in the court. The Tang Emperor and his ministers should work together to fight against the foreign enemies. The minister of the Ministry of Rights looked at the people at the banquet and said earnestly. Someone said worriedly, "But when will the Empress and the 6th Prince return to Chang'an?" The gathering at the Building of Pines and Cranes ended quickly. The officials on the Empress's side finally decided to keep quiet for the time being and wait for this difficult period of time to pass before discussing other matters. However, from the attitude of the officials, including the arrangement of the imperial court for the defense of the eastern border and the anger of the people in Chang'an, it could be seen that the current Tang Empire, from the emperor to the ministers to the ordinary people, still believed that the Tang Empire would not lose, even though they were sad and angry about the result of the battle in capital Qing. Zhuge Warren had already resigned from his position as the director of the Imperial Center Administration. He also attended the gathering at the Building of Pines and Cranes. However, this person was usually a bit sinister and ruthless, so no one was willing to deal with him. Now that he had already resigned from his position, inviting him to the gathering was already out of respect for the Empress. Who would say anything more to him? Zhuge Warren was very clear about what the officials thought of him. He did not show any resentment, but was more silent than usual. In his opinion, these officials only knew how to talk and did not know what was important at the moment. Why did the Tang Empire's army suffer a crushing defeat? Why was the country in a crisis? It was precisely because the siblings in the palace were in an improper position and were extremely stupid. As long as they could welcome the Empress and the 6th Prince back, the Tang Empire would be at peace and all the problems would be solved. After leaving the Building of Pines and Cranes, Zhuge Warren did not return to his mansion. Instead, he walked in the direction of the imperial city. He knew that there were always cultivators following him in the Southern Gate Temple after he resigned, so he did not deliberately hide his whereabouts. Anyway, the place he was going to was not a place that anyone could enter. He went to the Imperial Palace's Imperial Guard Office. Su Chongshan was now the chief of the Imperial Guard Office of the Tang Empire. This calm elder, who had dealt with Ning Ke many times, was still as simple and amiable as before, until he saw Zhuge Warren's face that was like a poisonous snake. "Zhuge, isn't it a little inappropriate for you to appear here again?" Su Chongshan looked at Zhuge Warren and said with a slightly solemn and vigilant expression. Zhuge Warren said, "I think no matter how inappropriate it is, it can't be more inappropriate than you appearing here." Su Chongshan frowned and said, "I don't know what nonsense you are talking about." Zhuge Warren smiled and said, "I mean, there is nothing stranger than a master from the Devil's Doctrine becoming the chief of the Imperial Guard Office of the Tang Empire." Su Chongshan's eyes slowly narrowed, and a cold light flashed through them. Zhuge Warren did not seem to see his reaction. He walked straight to the chair and sat down. He lifted the front of his robe to shake off the non-existent dust and said calmly, "Sometimes when I think about it, I really admire you people. You are obviously cultivating the skills of the Devil's Doctrine, but how can you hide from so many people and become a martial arts master?" General Xiahou seemed to have obtained some kind of skill from the West Hill Divine Palace. "Did you learn it too?" At this moment, Su Chongshan became calm. He poured a cup of tea and slowly drank it, but he did not pay attention to him. Zhuge Warren looked at him and continued to praise, "The Devil's Doctrine is really powerful. They were wiped out by Mr. Ku and chased around the world by the West Hill Divine Palace, but they still managed to retain so many people. The person who made this plan back then should be the legendary Divine Lord Lotus, right? TSK, if this bigwig could live until now, and if General Xiahou was not killed by Ning Ke, wouldn't the Tang Empire's palace be completely under your control?" Su Chongshan smiled and said, "You know that no matter what you say now, no one in Chang'an will believe you. So you can tell me why you are here." Zhuge Warren slowly stopped smiling and stood up. He stared into his eyes and said, "I don't know what the Empress has to do with the Devil's Doctrine, but I am very sure that both Xiahou and you are on the Empress's side. I am also on the Empress's side, so we should work together to do something." Su Chongshan fell silent and said after a moment, "What do you want to do?" Zhuge Warren said, "Since you are on the Empress's side, then you should know very well what you want to do." Su Chongshan said slowly, "You want me to die?" Zhuge Warren said, "Now that the desolate man is about to be exterminated and the Tang Empire is also destroyed, there is no place in the world that can accommodate the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine. Since you are going to die, why not die meaningfully?" Ma Shixiang stood on the mud wall and looked at the sky. The sky in the wilderness was very gloomy, and it had been like this for many days. It looked like it was going to rain, but it never did. The news of the northeast border military's annihilation in the Yen territory had already reached the city of Wei. The coffin of the former emperor was still in Helan City, and no one knew when the Empress and the little prince would return to Chang'an. The entire sky of the Tang Empire was covered with dark clouds. Just like the city of Wei, no one knew when the storm would come. Ma Shixiang looked very solemn, but not because of the difficult situation the Tang Empire was facing. He was just an ordinary low-level general at the frontier fortress, and he had no right and no way to worry about the entire empire. He was ordered to guard the city of Wei, so he had to worry about the city of Wei. There are also some that I revise after eating and then update. Saving manuscripts doesn't seem difficult, but when I update 2 or 3 chapters every day, I'll find that the food I've saved up for a few autumns is gone. That feeling is really empty, so anxious. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 713. The city of Wei seemed to be as peaceful as before, but something worried Ma Shixiang. Recently, there were only a few caravans passing through the city of Wei. Although the continuous rainstorm made the grasslands soft and muddy, it still felt strange. What alarmed him the most was that, according to the reports of the riders, the horse gang that had been entrenched in Shubi Lake for years had suddenly disappeared without a trace. No one knew where those damnable guys had gone. When Ning Ke was still in the city of Wei, the 7 stockade villages cleaned up Shubi Lake most frequently and got the most income from collecting firewood. However, even in those years, the horse gang was still reluctant to give up Shubi Lake. The last time the horse gang left Shubi Lake was because of the black horse carriage. It was because Ning Ke and the girl took a look at the city of Wei from afar. Then why did they disappear this time? Was it because of the rainstorm? However, although the forest by Shubi Lake showed signs of loosening, there were no signs of landslide. The bold horse gang would never abandon their nest because of fear. Ma Shixiang walked down the low mud wall, greeted the soldiers and vendors in the city, and walked back to the shabby military tent. He was silent for a long time as he read the military intelligence report sent by the Northern Military Camp yesterday. Time gradually passed. The tent flap was lifted, and a lieutenant covered in dust hurriedly walked in. Ma Shixiang's eyes suddenly lit up. He suddenly stood up and said, "What did they say?" The captain shook his head and said, "Kaiping said that the military intelligence had already been sent to the Northern Military Camp." The other 6 stockade villages also found something strange, but there was no reply from the Northern Military Camp. Some of the Northern Battlefront Army followed His Majesty to the eastern wilderness. Now they are still in Helan City, and there is no news from them. Now the Imperial Court is going to send troops to Tuyang City for defense. Ma Shixiang looked at the summary of the military intelligence and frowned deeply. He continued, "The great general's mansion is now focusing on the eastward march. I'm afraid they have neglected the military intelligence reported by their subordinate." The captain asked, "Then what should we do?" "That's not what I'm most worried about," Ma Shixiang said worriedly. "What I'm most afraid of is that if the main force of the Northern Battlefront Army is transferred to the east, the Golden Tribe Royal Court will launch an all-out attack from the south. Even if the general's mansion can react, they won't be able to stop it." The lieutenant's expression immediately became extremely nervous, his voice trembling as he said, "All these years the Royal Court's cavalry has only dared to invade and harass us. How could they be so bold as to send their entire army south?" Ma Shixiang said calmly, "The Dean and His Majesty have passed away one after another, and the court is in turmoil. Now the northeast border military has suffered heavy losses. The palace cavalry is like a pack of hungry wolves. When we are strong, they do not dare to move, but when we are weak, they will bare their fangs." The captain asked, "General, what should we do?" "Salad. I'll ask chef to make a plate of bitter lettuce salad tonight. I'm a little angry these days." Ma Shixiang stood up and walked out of the tent, saying, "Also, tell everyone to raise the alert level to the highest. I remember there are still a dozen guns in the warehouse. Take them out and clean them. Be careful of open fire." In the gloomy moment before the storm, the highest military commander of the city of Wei at the border of the Tang Empire was giving out orders as if he was assigning chores, ordinary and meticulous. He would retire next year and return to his hometown to embrace his grandchildren. He did not want to see another war more than anyone else, but he knew better than anyone that no one could escape when the war came. Fortunately, he had seen many wars and seen many deaths. Although he vaguely knew that this war would be very different from the past, he was still very calm and slept soundly. In the early morning, Ma Shixiang was awakened by the emergency warning. He still had time to wash his face, put on his armor, wiped his sword, and tightened his bow. Under the protection of the soldiers, he came to the wall of the city of Wei in high spirits. The morning sun had already left the ground, and the wilderness was bathed in a warm red light. The clouds that had covered the city of Wei for many days had finally dispersed. However, the people in the city of Wei did not feel a trace of warmth when they saw the scene in front of them. Countless cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court bathed in the morning light. They covered the wilderness outside the city like a pack of black wolves. It was impossible to count their number with the naked eye. Ma Shixiang squinted and looked at the king's flag in the depths of the Golden Tribe Royal Court's cavalry. He suddenly smiled proudly and said, "We happen to be on the route of Chanyu's army. Old Wei and the others will envy me to death." The Tang soldiers on the wall of the city of Wei knew that Old Wei was the military commander of the Kaiping market. He had been suppressing the general all his life, and the general often gossiped about him. If it was any other day, they would inevitably make fun of him. But today no one could laugh out loud. Their faces were very pale, and their hands holding the hilts of their sabers were a little cold. Ma Shixiang stopped smiling and asked seriously, "Have you prepared the horses I asked you to prepare the day before yesterday?" An aide replied from the side, reporting to General, "Everything is ready." Ma Shixiang asked. Are they the best horses? Yes. Are they the best riders? Yes. One to report to the Kaiping market. I think Old Wei is about the same. One should be enough. Ma Shixiang said seriously. 4 to report to the northern military camp, and the other 4 to report to Chang'an. Remember to change horses without stopping. Now the whole Tang Empire needs your speed. The 9 Tang soldiers who had been selected in advance answered loudly. Ma Shixiang looked at the scene outside the city of Wei and said indifferently, Tell the people in Chang'an to forget about Prince Longqing and those bastards in the east. The real enemy of the Tang Empire is coming. The 9 Tang soldiers left from the rear of the city of Wei with dozens of the best horses in the city of Wei to carry out their mission. Ma Shixiang looked back at the owner of the restaurant, the laundry auntie, and the small number of residents under the wall. After a moment of silence, he said, I'm sorry. I have the responsibility to protect the people, but I'm afraid I can't protect you today. You can either leave or hide in the cellar. Believe me, the Tang army will come back one day. The adjutant asked, General, the enemy is strong. What should we do next? All the soldiers in the city of Wei looked at Ma Shixiang. Ma Shixiang's gray hair was flying in the morning wind. We have to protect the gate of the Tang Empire. Yes. The cavalry of the Golden Palace outside the city of Wei began to move. The entire wilderness began to shake. The mud walls of the city of Wei kept shaking, and the accumulated dust fell down. The dense grassland cavalrymen swarmed over like a tide, drowning the city of Wei in an instant. In the autumn of the 18th year of Tianqi era, the northeast border military of the Tang Empire was destroyed. Chang'an wanted to transfer a part of the northern army to Tuyang City to resist the invasion of the Yan army. At this moment, the Golden Palace, which had been quiet for decades, mobilized all its forces and invaded the Tang Empire. The Tang army in the 7 stockade villages fought back bravely, but the enemy was strong and they were defeated one after another. The grassland cavalry continued to move south, and the vanguard was directed at Chang'an. A friend asked, You said you want to work hard, but there are so few chapters every day. What's the point? I said the day before yesterday that I'm saving chapters for the double monthly votes the day after tomorrow. No matter how much I can save, I'm working hard. Then I said that Ning Ke hasn't appeared for a long time. It can't be helped because this story has nothing to do with him, and he can't appear all over the world. He is not the eldest brother, and he can't do the limitless state. Of course, he can't disappear forever. This is his story. I've set the stage for him, and he will come out the day after tomorrow. There will be 2 chapters tomorrow during the day, and the first chapter of the double monthly votes the day after tomorrow. Then, there will be many chapters during the day after tomorrow. I hope everyone will be satisfied, and I hope everyone can hold the monthly vote. Then, let's see if you want to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 714. The news of the Golden Tribe Royal Court's invasion spread across the world like wildfire and shocked the entire Central Plains. Chang'an reacted very quickly. Liu suppressed the uproar of the ministers of the Queen's faction with great courage. She did not care that she might become a laughingstock later and issued several military orders. She ordered the Northern Battlefront Army, which was moving towards Tuyang City, to retreat immediately. Together with the Northern Military Camp, they formed 2 lines of defense outside Hebei County. At the same time, she ordered the Southern Battlefront Army to stop fighting with the savage tribes in the primeval forest and to rush to the northern border of the empire as soon as possible. At the same time, she ordered the Western Battlefront Army to move north along the Pamir Mountains to harass the Golden Tribe cavalry that was invading the Tang Empire. What shocked the ministers the most was that Liu did not care that Chang'an might be out of control. She even sent the Yulin Royal Guards that she had the most control to the northern border. At the emergency court meeting, all the ministers admitted that Her Highness's arrangement was selfless and timely. But there were still people who strongly opposed it. In the ministers' view, the northern battlefront army could not support Tuyang City, which meant that the Yen army and the cavalry of the left king's palace could march straight in. Her Highness had also sent the Yulin royal guards to the northern border. What would Chang'an do then? The northern battlefront army's morale would definitely be damaged after so many setbacks. It was better to go to Tuyang City, according to the previous decision, and leave the task of defending against the Golden Tribe royal court to the other armies. Liu used only 2 sentences to settle the dispute. Chang'an will never be conquered. Even I am not afraid of death. Why should you be? After the new emperor ascended to the throne, Liu had always been kind and gentle. The reason why she would change her attitude and show her absolute toughness at this moment was because she knew better than anyone else how terrifying the Golden Tribe royal court was. She used to marry the talented Chanyu of the Golden Tribe royal court and lived in the wilderness for a long time. She knew that the grassland cavalry that had been quiet for many years was the real threat to the Tang Empire. Until now, her guards were still the barbarians that she brought back from the wilderness. She knew very well that the Golden Tribe royal court was a monster that had been suppressed by the Tang Empire for hundreds of years. If the Tang Empire could no longer suppress it, it would unleash unimaginable destructive power. Compared to the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court, the cavalry of the left king's palace was like a child, while the Yen army was like a crying girl. Under the terrible pressure of the Golden Palace's southward invasion, Liu had no interest in paying attention to the army led by Prince Long Qing. She was very clear that the vast territory of the Tang Empire and the local armies of the various prefectures would exhaust them. Other than some losses to the people, it would not affect the overall situation. Therefore, even though the officials of the Empress faction opposed it, even though even her most loyal subjects carefully expressed their doubts in private, she still insisted on mobilizing the entire empire's forces to the north. The facts of the future would prove that her current decision was correct. However, at that time, not many people could understand her decision. After the court meeting ended, she also felt extremely tired. A faint fear slowly rose from the deepest part of her heart. Was this her retribution for tampering with her father's edict? At this moment, there was a noise outside the hall. She frowned slightly, but before she could say anything, she saw several officials led by eunuchs hurrying in. Li Huiyuan, He Mingqi, and the new director of Tianwu Agency also walked in from the side door. Everyone looked extremely serious. Liu was slightly shocked, but her expression did not change. She asked, "What happened?" He Mingqi glanced at His Majesty. Li Huiyuan walked forward and handed a letter in his hand to Liu. The official who came from outside the palace said in a trembling voice, "The West Hill Divine Palace has just issued an edict." The edict from the West Hill Divine Palace, together with a letter from the Hierarch Lord, was sent to Chang'an. In the edict, the West Hill Divine Palace exposed the identity of the Empress and pointed out that the Tang Emperor had protected the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine for decades, which was a blasphemy against the filthy country. 2 generations of the Academy were punished by heaven because they disrespected Haotian, so the Divine Hall called for the whole world to attack the Tang Empire. It also said that the Golden Palace went south under the order of Haotian. They advised the believers of the Tang Empire not to resist, but to overthrow the Dark Royal family. After reading the edict from the Divine Hall, Liu began to read the letter from the Hierarch Lord. Compared with the Divine Hall's ornate letter, the Hierarch Lord's handwritten letter to her was much simpler. There was only one sentence written on it. "The night covers the stars, the Tang Empire is restless, Your Highness, surrender." She was silent, and her fingers holding the letter kept trembling. The hall was quiet. Li Huiyuan looked at his sister nervously. He Mingqi slightly lowered his head. The eunuchs and palace maids were pale, and the officials widened their eyes. If the Golden Palace going south was the strongest enemy that the Tang Empire had encountered in decades, then the edict from the West Hill Divine Palace and the letter from the Hierarch Lord were the things that the Tangs were most afraid of. Yes, there was no country in the world that could defeat the Tang Empire. Even the Golden Palace, as long as the Tang Empire could survive the initial period, they would eventually win. However, if the whole world began to attack the Tang Empire, could the Tang Empire withstand it? Many years ago, the Tang Empire had faced a similar situation. But at that time, the Tang Empire had the headmaster, and now the headmaster had ascended to heaven. Any other country would have collapsed in the face of such terrible pressure and desperate prospects to attack a country with the whole world's power. The Tang Empire did not collapse. The confidence and strong spirit that had been tempered for 1,000 years made the people living here vigilant and uneasy, but they still did not have the idea of giving up. All the institutions of the imperial court took action as fast as possible. Chang'an was in a state of solemnity. All kinds of military orders were sent from Chang'an to every region of the vast territory. In contrast, the imperial palace, the political and military power center of the Tang Empire, became quiet. Everything that should be done was being done. What else could they do but wait? Liu stood by the stone railing and looked at the moon in the night sky. She was silent. She thought of the words in the letter written by the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and the instructions made by the imperial astronomer many years ago. She slowly clenched her hands behind her back. Her nails cut her palms and stained them with blood. She took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed the fear and confusion in her heart. She turned around and walked around the side of the hall. She walked across the small lake and entered the imperial study. She had never entered the imperial study since she changed the edict and let Li Huiyuan ascend the throne. This was because this small room was filled with her father's scent, and she felt a little stifled. However, she still came today because she needed her father to give her spiritual comfort and support. A military general walked into the imperial study and saluted. The war had not affected Chang'an yet, but the whole empire was facing a war. It was no longer a time of peace, but a time of war. When will General Su Shi arrive in Chang'an? She looked at the general and asked. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chang'an.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 7:15. This general was not one of Li Yu's or the Empress's, but Su Shi's. He did not know why the princess would ask such a question. After a moment of silence, he replied, Since there is no edict, the general is naturally still in the south. It is better to be honest at this time. If I am not wrong, General Su Shi has already started his return journey after the news of father's death reached Nanzhao. Li Yu said, Now is not the time to pursue these things. I want you to tell the old general that Chang'an and the Empire need him the most now. The West Hill Divine Palace has ordered the world to attack the Tang Empire, and it will definitely be disadvantageous to him. The old general must be careful. The general did not expect the princess not to blame the military for acting on their own, but to give him such an instruction. He said, Please rest assured, Your Highness. The general will definitely return to Chang'an safely. Hearing this, Li Yu's mind finally relaxed a little. Next, the eunuch brought Censor Song into the imperial study. The censor had nothing to do with military or political affairs, but Li Yu summoned him because of military and political affairs. This was because Censor Song was the liaison between her and the warlords of Qinghe County. The imperial court has already called back the Northern Army. The Western Army and the Southern Army have also received military orders. They will soon head north to resist the cavalry of the Golden Palace. The West Hill Divine Palace has been planning for many years. The South Jin Emperor's pain of losing his son has not subsided. There will definitely be an army coming from the south. To stop them, we can only rely on the navy on the Great Lake and the warlords of Qinghe County. The things that Li Yu had mentioned were all arranged by the imperial court. There was no problem of secrets being leaked. She looked at Censor Song quietly and said, "I will not forget my promise to the warlords of Qinghe County. I also hope that the warlords will perform well at this time. I am looking forward to the arrangements that the warlords will make in the West Hill Divine Palace." Censor Song knelt down on both knees without hesitation and bowed deeply. He said sincerely, "Please rest assured, Your Highness. The 100,000 state troops of Qinghe County and the 30,000 Zhuang troops of the warlords will definitely cooperate with the Navy. We will fight to the death to stop the Divine Hall and the South Jin Kingdom's army from the south of the Great Swamp. Even if we lose in the end, we will definitely buy enough time for the Empire." "Very good," Li Yu looked at him quietly and said. After Censor Song left, Grand Scholar Mo Han of the Hall of Illustrious Persons walked out from behind the bookshelves. He looked at the tightly closed door of the imperial study and said with a little worry, "If there is a Defender General of the state in Chang, and both the military and the people's morale will be further stabilized. I'm still worried about Qinghe County. Although the warlords have surrendered for many years. Don't worry. The clans spent so many resources to push Hui Yuan and me to this position. Even if they have other ideas, they can't change their direction in such a short period of time. Otherwise, the strong tearing force will cause great problems within the clans." Li Yu did not wait for him to finish. She said coldly, "Moreover, the descendants of the warlords, including Elder Chui's second son and a few grandsons, are all in Chang'an. How can they be disloyal?" Mo Han thought for a moment and felt that there were indeed no loopholes in Her Highness's arrangement. However, the worried expression on his face was still not completely gone. He asked, "Is there still no movement from the academy?" Li Yu was silent. Suddenly, she picked up a paperweight from the table and threw it on the ground. With a crack, the paperweight broke into countless pieces. She could not suppress the anger in her heart. Her body trembled as she said, "The academy is still closed. The Tang Empire has nurtured the academy for thousands of years. Now that the empire is in danger, are they still not willing to help?" At this moment, a eunuch outside the imperial study said something softly. Li Yu's anger had not subsided. She ordered him to leave. The eunuch's voice trembled slightly, but he did not leave. He continued to say that someone wanted to see Her Highness. Hearing that person's name, Li Yu was stunned. Mo Han frowned slightly and said, "Your Highness, you can see him yourself. I will leave first." The person who entered the palace that night and insisted on seeing Her Highness was Cao Xiaoshu. No wonder neither the guards nor the chief eunuch dared to ask him to leave. They didn't even dare to report it. Li Yu looked at the middle-aged man in a green robe under the autumn tree. After a moment of silence, she said, "A few days ago, I specially invited second Uncle Chow to the palace, but he ignored me. Why do you want to see me today?" Cao Xiaoshu said, "A few days ago, Your Highness wanted to see me about politics. I told His Majesty that I would not care about politics of the Tang Empire, so I was unwilling to enter the palace to see you." Li Yu frowned slightly and asked, "Then why are you willing to see me tonight?" Cao Xiaoshu said, "Because this is no longer about politics. It concerns the safety of the Tang Empire." Li Yu said, "Second Uncle Chow, please speak directly." Cao Xiaoshu said, "I want to ask for 2 imperial edicts." Li Yu was a little surprised and asked, "Imperial edicts? What do you want to do?" Cao Xiaoshu said, "An imperial edict to the Fish Dragon Gang. If Chang'an is stirred up by the Taoists of the West Hill Divine Palace, the brothers in the gang can help His Majesty to suppress it." Li Yu looked at him quietly, as if trying to see if there was any hidden meaning in his words. She said, "Chang'an will not be in chaos, so I think there is no need for this imperial edict." Cao Xiaoshu looked at her and said, "Is Your Highness really confident that Chang'an will not be in chaos?" Li Yu said, "There is the Chang'an local government, the bodyguard office, and the valiant cavalry battalion in the city." Without waiting for her to finish, Cao Xiaoshu said, The second imperial edict I want to ask for is related to the valiant cavalry battalion. I hope that His Majesty or Your Highness can grant me temporary authority to lead the valiant cavalry battalion." Li Yu's frown deepened. She did not understand his request and said, "I have already promised that Chang'an will not be in chaos. No matter how annoying those officials loyal to the Queen are, I will not do anything to them before we solve the external problems. So what do you want the valiant cavalry battalion for?" "I want to leave with the valiant cavalry battalion." "You want to leave Chang'an?" "That's right." Cao Xiaoshu looked at her and said, "You and I both know that all the military power of the Tang Empire has to be used to resist the Golden Palace and the West Hill Divine Palace's army heading north. A part of it needs to be left to keep an eye on the Yueluan Kingdom. Now that the northeast border military has been destroyed, the imperial court can no longer find any troops to resist the Yan Kingdom's army." Li Yu shook her head and said, "There are still prefectural armies in the Gushan Commandery and other states." Cao Xiaoshu said, "The prefectural army moves slowly and cannot keep up with the speed of the grassland cavalry." Li Yu said, "The grassland cavalry from the eastern wilderness is not dangerous. Even if we let them enter the country, they will not affect the overall war situation. But the people in the east of the Tang Empire will be killed, kidnapped, and burned alive." Cao Xiaoshu looked at her quietly and said, "I know what you are thinking. If we allow those grassland cavalrymen to invade, the more they rob, the more they kill, the more they burn, and the more they break military discipline, the slower they will act. Like greedy bears, they will eventually be too tired, and even have no desire to eat anymore. Therefore, they will not be able to threaten Chang'an and the Tang Empire's most prosperous vital point." Li Yu asked coldly, "Is this not right? Losing the old, the weak, the women, the children, the ordinary people, and burning the fields, villages, and dilapidated cities can save an army. It may be able to exchange for 1,000 years of peace for the Tang Empire. If you look at it this way, of course it is right. It can even be called a wise decision and a calm response." After a moment of silence, Cao Xiaoshu said, "But the Tang Empire is not just Chang'an. The old, the weak, the women, the children, and the ordinary farmers are also people of the Tang Empire. Those fields, villages, and dilapidated cities are also part of the Tang Empire." Li Yu said, "So, you want to bring the valiant cavalry battalion to the east?" Cao Xiaoshu said, "Yes. If the former emperor was still alive, he would have done so long ago." Li Yu said, "Even if you know that the valiant cavalry battalion cannot change the situation in the east?" Cao Xiaoshu said, "At least, we have to let the people in that land know that the Tang Empire has not forgotten them." Li Yu was silent for a long time and then said, "I will not give you the first edict." Cao Xiaoshu said, "Thank you, Your Highness." When Li Yu was summoning everyone in the imperial study, her brother Li Huiyuan was also talking to someone in his palace. However, the conversation did not go well. He Mingxi glanced at the dark night and turned to look at Li Huiyuan, who was livid. He said, "Cao Xiaoshu is in the imperial study now, but I don't know what he is talking about with Your Highness." Li Huiyuan waved his arms anxiously and scolded, "Those things will be arranged by my royal sister. Why do you care about those things? I just want to know if there is any way to contact the people from the West Hill Divine Palace." He Mingxi bowed slightly and said, "Your Majesty, even if we can contact the West Hill Divine Palace now, it is impossible to change their mind. You have to know that the Divine Hall has already issued the edict, and the two sides have already fallen out." Li Huiyuan was stunned when he heard that. His face became more and more ugly, and his right hand kept shaking. He wanted to take a sip of tea from the teacup on the table, but he almost dropped it. "Think of a way quickly," he said. "If we can't contact the West Hill Divine Palace, then quickly find a way to contact General Su Shi. Tell him that the West Hill Divine Palace is ready to ambush him on the road." He Mingshi was slightly shocked when he heard that and said, "Your Majesty, do you want this to be exposed?" Li Huiyuan slowly raised his head and stared at him fiercely. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Even if the military knows that I once tried to kill the Defender General of the state with the enemy, I will make it right. I originally thought that it was just Long Qing leading the grassland cavalry to disturb the border. Who would have thought that it would become a world war? I want to protect the Tang Empire and the Defender General. Do it immediately." Chao Xiaoshu left the palace. He did not take the imperial edict, but Li Yu's handwritten letter. Now that Li Yu was supervising the country, he had this letter, and the commander of the valiant cavalry battalion was his brother, so he was confident that he could take the valiant cavalry battalion out of Chang'an. After returning to the Spring Breeze Pavilion Street, the Chao Mansion began to hold a banquet and invited a theatrical troupe. At a time when the Tang Empire was in a precarious situation, this kind of behavior was really eye-catching. But no matter whether it was the guests who attended the banquet, Linzi who was holding his child and crying silently, or old Master Chow who was holding a walking stick and looking calm, no one raised any objections. This was a farewell banquet, a farewell banquet. Censor Song left the palace. He first went to the Qinghe County Guild Hall according to Li Yu's instructions. He met with the descendants of the warlords of Qinghe County and had a long talk with the second son of Old Master Chui. Then he brought the second son of Old Master Chui back to the mansion and held a banquet. He invited more than 10 singers to join in the fun. After the banquet, Censor Song was dead drunk. The censor's wife served him lovingly and said, "Drunkenness is bad for your health. Moreover, you are the censor. I am afraid that people will attack you for doing such a thing at this time." Censor Song opened his eyes and looked at the curtain on top of the bed. After a long silence he laughed and said, "There are many kinds of banquets. Farewell banquets, and farewell banquet. Tonight's banquet is for the palace to see. I want the palace to think that we are drinking wine to honor an old friend from our hometown. How can the imperial court be completely at ease with people like us from Qinghe County? Whether it is me or the second son of Old Master Chui, or even every descendant of the warlords in the Qinghe County Guild Hall, there are secret guards following us all year round. So in the end we will all die. Tonight's banquet is actually drinking wine to strengthen our courage. But for the sake of 1,000 generations, even if it is the wine of death, we have to drink it all." The night shrouded Shao Mountain. There was a military camp at the foot of Shao Mountain. It was made up of more than 10 military tents, but there were not many people there. In one of the military tents there were continuous coughs of pain. Su Shi was already very old. Whether it was the wrinkles on his face or his worsening lung disease, they all proved this. But he did not allow himself to fall, especially at a time like this. He was the Defender General of the Tang Empire and the de facto leader of the military. He was deeply trusted and favored by the Emperor. He had spent most of his time in the Southern Army because the hot and humid climate in the south was good for his health. Shao Mountain was a few hundred miles away from the Southern Army, just a little north. The annoying lung disease relapsed again. The old general's chest was like a broken drum, causing all the guards in the camp to feel pain. In the battle for the throne, General Su Shi, whose words were the most powerful, had remained silent. Back then, because of his vigilance against the academy, many people, including Li Yu and her brother, had suspected that he secretly supported the Empress. But it turned out that he did not support anyone but the Emperor. When the Emperor passed away, he supported the edict of the Emperor. So now he supported Li Yu and her brother. However, when the imperial edict summoning him back to the capital did not reach the Southern Army, he suddenly felt that something was strange. He left the Southern Army with more than 100 guards and sneaked into the forest towards Chang'an. They spent the night at the foot of the mountain. Wang Jinglu once again questioned the decision of the general. Su Shi stared at him and shouted, "When a general is away from home, He should not obey the emperor's orders. Moreover, the emperor is gone. Wang Jinglu recalled this sentence and always sighed with emotion. When one was old, it was easy to become like a child who liked to be angry. General Su Shi was in a hurry to return to Chang, and because he was worried about the state affairs. But thinking deeper, it was probably because he was in a hurry to see the emperor for the last time. At midnight there will be an update. There will be a single chapter. That is the beginning of the double monthly vote. It will be the final battle for the annual monthly votes and the beginning of the war for the Tang Empire. See you then. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 7:16. Wang Jinglu poured the foot-washing water out of the tent and took a towel to wipe Su Shi's feet. He rubbed the old skin on the soles of the general's feet. According to my estimation, the imperial edict has probably reached the southern battlefront army by now. What if something happens to us if we sneak away like this and violate the military discipline of the Tang Empire? I didn't leave with the army. These 100 guards are the private army that His Majesty gave me. They just came to the mountain to recuperate because of illness. How did they violate the military discipline of the Tang Empire? Even if I did, who would dare to punish me? Fine, just pretend I didn't say anything. Why is your temper getting worse and worse? Wang Jinglu said angrily. Su Shi was really like a child now. Seeing that he was angry, Su Shi smiled happily and comforted him. Don't worry. I'm the great defender general of the state. How can I be in any danger in the Tang Empire? At this moment, an urgent military report came from outside the tent. The army of the Golden Tribe Royal Court was marching south. The West Hill Divine Palace ordered the world to attack the Tang Empire. There was dead silence in the military tent. Wang Jinglu's face was very ugly, and Su Shi's smile had long disappeared. He had returned to the dignified and calm demeanor that a military leader of the Tang Empire should have. Return to the southern battlefront army immediately. Su Shi glanced at the dark Shao mountain outside the tent and said, if the new emperor and Her Highness didn't make a mistake, the order for the southern army to move north should have arrived by now. Wang Jinglu was slightly startled and asked, what about you? Su Shi said, since the whole world is going to attack the Tang Empire, of course I have to go to Chang'an. You don't have to worry. His Highness will definitely order me to return to the north as soon as possible. Wang Jinglu nodded, but he felt that something was wrong. Suddenly, he thought of something and frowned. Since the West Hill Divine Palace has issued an edict, they must want to harm you. Su Shi patted him on the shoulder with a smile and said, as I said before, this is the territory of my Tang Empire. Who dares to kill me, the Defender General of the state? Wang Jinglu said, is there anything the West Hill Divine Palace doesn't dare to do now? I've been in the army for decades. Don't you think I know better than you? Now that we are at the foot of Shao Mountain, if anyone wants to harm me, they will have to cross the mountains from Qinghe Prefecture. The people from Qinghe Prefecture are not blind. Su Shi smiled and said, also, you have to understand that although I'm old, I'm not that easy to kill. There aren't many people in this world who are qualified to kill me. Wang Jinglu thought that this was indeed the case. He counted with his fingers, but he really could not find anyone who could really threaten the old man. Although the old man was very old, he was still a very strong old man. The military situation was more important. Wang Jinglu had to bring back General Su Shi's latest military order. He also had to coordinate with the Southern Army to organize the North to resist the Jin, so he left the foot of Shao Mountain that very night. Not long after he left Pyrolite Mountain, Su Shi put on his military boots and armor. Then, he walked out of the tent and looked at the forest in the night sky. He slowly narrowed his eyes. The guards in the tent heard the faint sound of armor and scabbards colliding. They walked out of the tent with extreme vigilance and came to the great general's side, asking what had happened in a low voice. Su Shi did not answer, but only looked at the night mountain quietly. He wanted to send these guards away just like he had sent Wang Jinglu away. But just like what he had said to Wang Jinglu before, these guards were the private army given to him by His Majesty. They were unparalleled loyalty, and would never leave his side under any circumstances. There are indeed not many people in this world who are qualified to kill me. Su Shi looked at the quiet night forest and said slowly, "The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace, the Devil's Doctrine 23-year cicada cultivation, the sage of sword Liu Bai, and those young world wayfarers. I always thought that these people would not risk their lives to kill me. I did not expect that you would come personally." A voice as loud and clear as thunder suddenly rang out in the night mountain. "After the death of the headmaster of the academy and the Tang Emperor, you are the last spirit of the Tang Empire. If I don't do it myself, wouldn't it be too disrespectful to you?" As soon as he finished speaking, the Shao Mountain shook, and the mountain rocks collapsed. A giant chariot appeared, crushing the rocks in the forest. The chariot was covered with layers of gauze. Even in the darkness of the night, one could still see the towering figure inside. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace had come personally. There were 64 West Hill Divine Guards beside the chariot. Before the Battle of the Wilderness, the hierarch lord had not left the Peach Mountain for many years. Now he has come deep into the Tang Empire and risked his life for me, a dying old man. I can't help but feel a little smug. Su Shi's voice was like cold steel, breaking through the wind and falling into the dark forest, exploding in front of the giant chariot. But I still want to know who will survive tonight. After saying this, he suddenly coughed twice. Wang Jinglu was running in the dark forest. Suddenly he stopped and looked up at the sky. There were clouds tonight. There was no night and the sky was pitch black. At this moment, it suddenly started raining. The raindrops fell on his face, making pitter-patter sounds. The rainwater flowed into his mouth, and it tasted a little salty and bitter. Wang Jinglu suddenly turned around and ran back the way he came. When he rushed out of the dark forest and came to the top of a cliff, he saw the forest in the distance collapsing, sand and stones flying. No matter how violent the night rain was, it could not hide the terrifying collision of the qi of heaven and earth. Wang Jinglu clearly felt the aura of General Su Shi. He felt that the general's aura was getting dimmer and dimmer. He knelt in the rain and shouted heartbreakingly, "No!" Only then did he realize that the general had vaguely seen the direction of fate. That was why he asked him to return to the Southern Army. In fact, he wanted him to avoid this earth-shattering battle. After the rainy night at the Spring Breeze Pavilion, Wang Jinglu joined the army and had been under General Su Shi's command. Over the years, he served the general like a nephew. He was used to loneliness since childhood and began to like the noise of the military camp. He even felt that General Su Shi was like his father. His chubby face gradually thinned, and his playful heart gradually calmed down. He gradually understood that compared to freedom, there were many other beautiful things in the world that were also worth cherishing. However, on this rainy night, those beautiful things were torn apart. Wang Jinglu knelt in the pouring rain and cried bitterly. After a long time, he stood up again and wiped the rain and tears off his face. His expression gradually became firm, and he turned around and ran to the north. He did not return to the Southern Army. He wanted to return to Chang'an as soon as possible. He wanted to tell the people of Chang'an. General Su Shi was dead. The terrifying powerhouse who killed the general was heading towards Chang'an, and Qinghe County had rebelled. The scenery of Qinghe County was beautiful and elegant. The houses had white walls and black eaves, high and low, and there were clear streams and stone bridges. It was very different from the magnificent scenery of other parts of the Tang Empire. The best scenery was still the Fujian River. The manors of the warlords of Qinghe County were all located on the banks of the Fujian River. The manor of the Chui family naturally occupied the most beautiful stretch of the river bank and the most beautiful forest. However, it was located in the southern wilderness. Although the forest was beautiful, it was far from steep. The small building in the depths of the Chui garden was still as dark as before. Old Master Chui handed a hot towel to his son behind him and looked at the 6 white-haired old men in the chairs. He sighed and said, "Haotian has mercy on us. Before we die, we can finally wait for this unprecedented change." One of the old men said calmly, "The so-called intentions have been set many years ago. The ancestors of the various clans have never forgotten about the restoration of the country. However, there are some details that still need to be carefully considered." Old Master Chui said calmly, "The specific matters will naturally be carried out by the descendants of the clans. We have lived in Qinghe County for many years. There will definitely be no problems." Eldest brother is right. However, there are many descendants of the various clans in Chang and city seeking to become officials. The Li family will definitely not give us a chance to take them out of the city. How should we deal with this? Her Highness Liu trusts us old men not only because she thinks that we cannot withstand the tearing of a sudden change of direction, but also because she believes that we cannot bear to part with the flesh and blood of the clans. Old Master Chui said calmly, however, she does not know that the clans of Qinghe County have been wholeheartedly thinking about restoring the country since hundreds of years ago. It was not a sudden change of direction at all. She could not have imagined that in order to complete the great task of restoring the country, we would not hesitate to sacrifice hundreds of descendants of the clans, even if more people died. Old Master Chui smiled slightly as he looked at the complicated expressions of the white-haired old men. He said, "You do not have to be sad in advance. As long as the war goes smoothly, the Li family may not dare to kill our descendants for the sake of future plans. They may even take good care of them. But can the war really go smoothly? Haotian Taoism has been planning for many years. The Tangs are arrogant and extravagant. Now that the northeast border military has been destroyed, the Golden Palace has come south, and the Hierarch Lord has personally taken action, Su Shi will definitely die. As long as Qinghe County opens the door, the West Hill Divine Palace Army and the Jin Army can march north. Regardless of whether the Tang Empire is destroyed, Chang'an City will no longer be able to order us around. Speaking of which, we have to thank Mr. 13 of the Academy, Ning Quebec. If not for him protecting the daughter of Yama, the headmaster would not have been punished by heaven. If not for him shooting the crown prince of the Yen kingdom in the wilderness, the Yen emperor would not have gone crazy and mobilized the entire country. Old Master Chui smiled and said, "In the future, when Qinghe County succeeds in restoring the country, we will build a stone tablet by the Fujian River to record this grand event. When that time comes, do not forget to add Ning Kei's name." The joyful laughter of the old men rang out in the small building. The history of the families in Qinghe County was longer than that of most countries in the world. 1,000 years ago, this was originally a loose country where warlords took turns to rule. According to clan etiquette, the Chui and Song warlords had always maintained a strong cohesiveness, and Qinghe County was run by them like an iron plate. No matter how Chang'an City tried to separate them, they could only touch the outermost layer and could not penetrate deep into the core of Qinghe County. Today, Qinghe County and Yangguan City, from the city guards to the state army generals, and more than 1,000 middle and low-ranking officials, were either the children of the warlords or people who had a close relationship with the warlord. Even the Tang Navy, which was strictly monitored by the imperial court, had been infiltrated by the families in Qinghe County. This could not be blamed for Chang'an's lack of vigilance. When the Navy recruited soldiers, most of the people in Qinghe County applied. And rather than saying that the people in Qinghe County were Tangs, they were more like the servants of the warlords. As time passed, the ordinary Navy officers and soldiers, who were once inconspicuous, gradually gained relatively important positions with their experience and achievements. Although the high-ranking generals of the Navy were still appointed by Chang and city and transferred from other places, the middle and lower levels of the Navy could no longer escape the control of Qinghe County. One day in the autumn of the 18th year of Tianqi era, it was still raining heavily in the west of Shao Mountain, but the sun was shining brightly in Qinghe County in the east, and the autumn wind was refreshing. The Yangguan City Guard's mansion summoned all the officials to discuss the important matter of gathering the army and cooperating with the Navy to resist the invading enemies from the south. All the officials responded to the order and arrived. After a few cups of tea, Zhong Dajuan, the military advisor of the Yangguan City Guard's mansion, walked in with a smile. The gates of the Yangguan City Guard's mansion closed. The officials looked at each other, not knowing what had happened. Zhong Dajuan waved his hand. There were angry rebukes and painful injuries in the Yangguan City Guard's mansion. Blood stained the bluestone tiles. Almost at the same time, the families in Qinghe County invited the Tang Navy to a certain place by the Fuqian River to discuss the war. Blood stained the Fuqian River. No matter how powerful the warlords of Qinghe County were, it was impossible for them to capture all the officials and generals who were loyal to the imperial court. Therefore, on that sunny autumn day, many battles broke out in Qinghe County and Yangguan City. According to the statistics, a total of more than 300 Tang officials were beheaded. More than 1,000 people from the Tang Navy, from the generals to the auxiliary soldiers, died, and more than 1,000 people were escorted to the coal mountain downstream of the Fuqian River to do hard labor. When it came to a rebellion, one side planned and waited patiently for 1,000 years, while the other side knew nothing about it. The outcome was already decided, and the only thing that could affect the outcome was the hearts of the people. The hearts of the people in Qinghe County were very complicated. They were used to the warlords being the real gods. They had an undisguised sense of superiority and contempt for the Tangs from other states and counties. They did not have any good feelings for Chang and city. But after all, they had lived under the rule of the Tang Empire for so many years. They had experienced the glory of the Tang Empire countless times, and they were proud of it. Now, they were going to betray the Tang Empire? The young people of Qinghe County, including some young descendants of the warlords, could not accept this at all. They could not believe what they were seeing. However, just as they were about to speak, their old grandfather and strict father appeared in front of them. They dragged them back to the ancestral shrine and made them kneel in front of the ancestral tablet. They began to tell the sad history of the fall of Qinghe County many years ago, reminiscing the glory of the old days with tears streaming down their faces. The young people of Qinghe County did not forget that history, but they loved the Tang Empire more. They loved being proud Tangs, so the words of their fathers had no power over them. However, could they raise the swords in their hands and cut their own relatives? In the autumn of the 18th year of the Tang Empire's Tianqi era, the headmaster ascended to heaven. The emperor passed away. The academy closed its doors. The northeast border military was destroyed in the Battle of Capital Qing. The Golden Palace went south. Qinghe County rebelled. The West Hill Divine Palace and the tens of thousands of troops from the South Jin Kingdom came, covering the sky. The Defender General of the state, Su Shi, died in battle. Then, the army of the Yueluan Kingdom entered the Pamir Mountains. The whole world attacked the Tang Empire. The Tang Empire seemed to be doomed. At this moment, a young man in black was walking in the depths of the wilderness. He had just woken up. Every night after he woke up, he was talking to the moon. He missed his teacher and his wife. He did not know what had happened in the world. If he knew, could he change everything? It has begun. Let's begin. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 7:17. I heard the sound of a drum. After listening carefully, I realized that it was my heart beating. This wasn't an artistic expression, but rather a realistic situation. I was very nervous, unprecedentedly nervous, and also unprecedentedly excited. The doubling of monthly votes had finally begun. The final battle for the monthly votes had finally begun. At this time, there was no longer any need to describe my desire to become the champion of the monthly vote. I could only say that ever since I set my goal, I became incomparably resolute. I would continue to bring out my greatest effort and diligence to write more and more of Shogun's Knight, all the way until the final 3 days. Vote for Jiang Yi, vote for Qin Yunyan, vote for the spy, vote for Zhu Keiji. These votes would be counted in the total number of monthly vote. No matter which book has ever made you laugh, or sad, or enriched, or even angered, I'm here to ask for your support and to keep your monthly ticket. You can only cast 2 monthly votes a day, so please don't hesitate to vote for me in case you forget to do so. I won't let you down with these 3 days of updates. Today's first chapter has just been updated. I'll go to sleep now. If I can't fall asleep, I'll continue writing. I'll get up at 6 o'clock sharp tomorrow and start writing after eating. The second update started at 8 in the morning. Then 1 chapter per hour. I'm also someone who has a stockpile of manuscripts now. Although it's not a lot, I can still hold on. But at the same time, I will continue to write desperately. Strive to maintain 1 chapter per hour. How many chapters will be updated today? I don't know. I'll write until I can't write anymore. I will update until I can no longer maintain 1 chapter per hour. It was said in the past that being the champion of the monthly votes was the greatest honor in the online literature circle. Therefore, the greatest honor was to be the champion of the annual monthly vote. If he wanted to obtain this glory, how could he succeed without fighting? In front of such a grand battle, I will display the grandest sincerity and determination. I offer you a cordial invitation to fight by my side. I earnestly ask you to cast your precious monthly ticket. Actually, I had revised this single chapter many times. Suddenly, I wasn't nervous anymore. Just like the last chapter said. Since it had begun, let's begin. We win together. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.